Welcome back, friend of quiet stories. Before words, let the city breathe. Siena holds its hill like a shell in a pale wash of winter light. The brick and travertine still cold from the night. You hear a rope shiver high in the Torre del Mangia, then the first note drops. A bell that is more weight than sound. It rolls across the shell-shaped campo and settles in your ribs. Another follows, and another, nearer, from a parish campanile tucked between roofs the color of baked clay. The town is nothing but air and metal, counting. As the strokes fade, your breath fogs. You smell damp stone, the faint sour of ash from last night's hearths, and something medicinal from a door a crack ajar, vinegar and rosemary steeped against bad air. Footsteps hesitate at the mouth of a lane. A woman crosses herself and turns back. You stand under windows shuttered against news. Now step aside with the view. In the first months of 1348, Siena was a web of trade and guilds and pieties, like any thriving Tuscan commune. Government belonged to the Nine, men of merchant stock who prized order. Their palace faced this very square, its long brick wall answered by a civic tower meant to keep ambition the size of law. Across the ridge, the Duomo's black and white marble stood like a book left open to shine, and opposite it, the great hospital of Santa Maria della Scala kept doors for poor and sick. Then ships brought a new arithmetic to Europe's ports, and the numbers ran inland. Chroniclers would later argue about where and how the pestilence traveled, what winds helped it, what sins earned it, what humors misfired when swellings rose in groin and armpit. What they do not dispute is speed. In Tuscany, the spring came with fear, and by high summer bells tolled without rest. The city's day begins anyway, because days do. A baker unlatches a plank and slides out 2 flat loaves he kept back from the night's firing, the crusts gone from gold to stone while he slept in a chair. He will soak them later in broth. A notary opens his inkhorn and closes it again. There are more wills than hands, and witnesses are thin on the ground. Beneath a small arch off the campo, a friar leans on a post and looks toward the hospital stairs, wondering how long his voice will last. He plucks at a string of wooden beads polished by habit. You listen for the other sounds a morning makes and notice their absence. No quarrel from the cooper's lane, no chant of apprentices at the dyer's, no mule bells moving wine up from the country. The quiet has a texture, stretched, thinned, a sheet you can almost see through. From the hospital, a porter bars then unbars a door, as if the simple act of moving wood could govern the number of bodies that arrive. Santa Maria della Scala is not a place of miracle. It is a place of linens boiled, straw changed, faces wiped with vinegar cloths, hands lifted for a cup of water when fever steals the strength to tilt it. They know how to comfort, and they know how to fear. A ledger waits on a lectern with yesterday's totals left unreckoned. You catch the edge of a wind and follow it up through the narrow street that climbs toward the cathedral. The stones are polished by years of feet, and this morning they hold a slickness from mist. At a corner niche, a painted Madonna looks down with that particular late Gothic calm Siena knows how to paint. Almond eyes, long fingers, authority softened by gold leaf. Someone has pinned a sprig of rue below. It is not magic, but it feels like intention, and intention is something to hold. When you reach the cathedral square, the Duomo is more than building, it is statement. Black and white, the city's colors ripple in bands up the facade. The striped campanile answers the sky with its own grammar. To your left, work on the grand extension, the so-called Duomo Nuovo, has already slowed to a cough of hammers. Ambition once wanted to triple the nave. Now rumor is faster than mortar, and men do not come when summoned. A clerk from the chapter passes carrying a folded parchment sealed in red. He glances toward the hospital and changes his route. Orders must bend to bodies. Below the square shows small acts of keeping. A woman scrubs a threshold with lye, pushing gray water into the gutter. A boy from the hospital's orphan quarter shoulders a basket of crusts toward the kitchen. 2 men carry a tub of lime that will dry the ground in a pit where a gravemaker works quick, careful, and near wordless. We do not cast the city as wicked. We cast it as frightened and therefore strange. Pages from nearby Florence speak of doors closed, kin avoided, the wealthy riding out to villas. Siena had its own variations on the same defense and the same failures of it. Merchants who could leave did so, priests who could not stay until they fell. Not every story is known by name. Most are counted by bell. A gust lifts grit, you taste it. Across the square, the hospital's painted loggias hold their breath. The porter, who has already raised the bar 3 times, raises it again. The bell in the tower does not peal for work, nor for a wedding, nor for a saint's day. It takes on the heavy interval reserved for plague dead, slow, regular, like the heart of something too large to see. And now another sound, wheels, wooden, hesitant, then firm. A cart turns in at the foot of the stairs, its rough boards whitened, where lime has spilled. Behind it comes a second, the mule blowing steam. A third pauses at the corner, where the roue is pinned, and does not cross itself, but lurches forward all the same. The friar at the post lets his beads fall and steps down 2 steps to meet the first driver. The bell changes rhythm, and for a moment no one speaks, as if the city is listening to learn what number it will be today. The steps of Santa Maria della Scala climb like a question carved in stone. Morning light flattens the risers, makes the edges hard. Whoever comes up must choose to keep going. The porter has already lifted the bar twice, but the bell's slow measure says the 3rd time will not be the last. Vinegar bites the air from a bucket left in the draft. A strip of linen, knotted at one end, dangles over the rim the way a flag surrenders. You take the final step and pass beneath the painted lintel into a cool that smells of lime, tallow, boiled cloth, and faint rosemary. Inside, the voice of the city thins to murmurs and instructions. Not there, there. Hold the cup. Steady. Wards line the long range, one for the fevered, one for the likely dying, another for the poor who have nothing but time and a palate. The building was made for generosity, pilgrims, orphans, foundlings, the ordinary sick. And now generosity has to move faster than its own provisions. A woman in a wool gown, sleeves rolled, gestures you aside so 2 men can carry through a boarded stretcher. Her hair is covered, not by a nun's veil exactly, but by the practical linen worn by women who wash and lift and wipe. If you ask her name, she gives only sister, and the sign of the cross made with a forearm that does not pause. She adds roux to the room's simmering pot, dips a cloth, rings it with a twist stronger than her frame suggests, and lays it over a forehead shining with the lacquer of fever. The patient's breath comes in small, shallow signatures that barely mark the surface of the day. There is a way of speaking here that has grown in a week what would normally take a year. Words shorten. Touch becomes an instruction more efficient than language. A hand to a shoulder means lift now. One to a wrist means stronger. 2 fingers pressed to the inside of an elbow mean stop. Pulse too fast. These gestures are not in any chronicle, because chronicles like names and explanations, not the grammar of bodies in crisis. But they govern the ward more surely than edicts do. Along the right-hand wall, a table holds what passes for armory. Earthenware cups, clouts of linen boiled to obedience. A small pewter spoon used to measure the pharmacy's theriac for those who can keep it down. Some swear by it, some say it helps only the seller. But in a world without proof, people choose the more hopeful doubt. A mortar stained from rosemary roux and sometimes myrrh. A knife for lancings that the sisters use rarely and reluctantly. The physicians argue for balancing humors. Yet even the confident hesitate when buboes rise like hard moons in groin or armpit. No one here pretends certainty. They do what they can and name it care. The carts that stopped at the stairs have emptied their living first. A man with the dark stain at his throat tries to stand and fails. A sister fits her shoulder under his and helps him across to a pallet. He smells of wool and fear. A boy, 12 perhaps, stares as if his eyes could keep someone from leaving. He grips a small sack with both hands because it contains his mother's comb and a ribbon. And if he loosens his grip, he may forget how her hair sounded when it was brushed. The friar from the door kneels to him and asks about kin. The boy names a street where half the shutters are already pinned and explains, mouth set to bluntness, that no one answers. The ledger on the lectern waits for numbers that the clerk does not want to write. His goose quill hesitates, then scratches. He notes arrivals by parish and name when there is one, by mark when there is not. Sometimes he can add an occupation, shearer, miller, spinner, apprentice to the dyers, and sometimes only woman or from the road. Witnesses are sparse. A second hand to confirm a will is worth almost as much as a loaf. The clerk carries a scent of ink and lye. Under his thumb, a red smear betrays wax from a seal broken earlier to free an appeal for alms. He will answer that letter after he boils his reed pens to quiet the thought of contagion. From the far end of the hall, a cough begins as a single event and becomes a chorus. The sister with the roux pauses, touches her chest lightly. Habit, prayer or a practical check of her own lungs, and goes toward the sound with a basin. She lifts one head, then another, wiping mouths, turning faces so breath does not fall back and drown its owner. When despair threatens to make hands clumsy, ritual steadies them. Wash, wring, wipe, rinse, replace straw, smooth the sheet, say the short blessing. If the patient is awake, talk of ordinary things. Whether over the fields, whether the olive pickers will have enough hands, whose goat has learned to open a latch. Not to deny the plague, but to prove that the world still contains things that aren't it. A physician arrives late, robe bright against the ward's dun, mask not beaked as later centuries will picture, but cloth-wrapped and perfumed. He considers a swelling's rim with a neat academic tilt of the head. He recommends a poultice to draw, then changes his mind and prescribes cautery to drive out the malign principle. Yet he is not cruel, he is educated and frightened, which is a complicated species of helplessness. The sister writes down nothing, she has no time for that, but she remembers, and when he is gone, she does the less harmful thing. Outside the door, lime dust makes small moons on the stone where a pit was sprinkled after yesterday's work. Two men lift a beer with knees bent and faces set to the discipline of keeping balance. The bell changes pace again, a slower, heavier count. In the yard, a barrel of water stands with a dipper. The friar insists on rinsing hands between tasks, even as he admits he cannot argue that it saves lives. It calms the living, he says, and the sister nods, and no one wastes words on the difference. At midday, a pot comes from the kitchen, and the smell brings the ward to its own kind of attention. Broth built from bones, leeks, a little saffron from a charity jar the apothecary keeps for the hospital. The bread goes in the bowls first to soften. Those who can swallow, swallow. Those who cannot are lifted against a chest and coaxed with a patience that seems to hang from the ceiling like light. Outside, in the orphan court, a woman rocks two infants who are not her own and sings a tune with more vowel than melody. The hospital was always a city within the city. Today it feels like the last one still keeping civic time. Afternoon tilts. Sun touches the lintels, finds the dust in the air, makes the ward visible in gold motes that drift and vanish. The clerk closes the ledger because ink will not dry in this damp. The porter bars the door again, then removes the bar because the bell tells him to. From the Duomo, a single note lands like a seal on wax. The square answers with a hush. The sister returns to the man with the dark stain. His breath is shallower. She dampens the cloth again and tells him, quietly, as if speaking of weather, that his brother has been sent for. Whether the message finds him is God's work, and the mule's. She straightens the sheet with the neatness everyone here preserves as defiance, and when the man's hand flexes, she places hers in it until the flex becomes rest. Then she stands, rinses the cloth, rings it once, and turns toward the door because someone has called, and the city has sent another cart to the foot of the stairs. Down in the lanes, shutters are tightening like mouths that do not wish to speak. The lanes around the Campo were once a braid of trades that tied Siena to itself. Each strand dyed its own color by work. This morning they lie slack. A shutter drops on its leather thong and thuds soft against brick. Another clenches tight and takes the street's light with it. Where the coopers used to drum staves into hoops, only a hoop leans uselessly against a wall, shadow making a second circle it cannot fit. The city still smells of what it knows, smoke, damp stone, last night's garlic. But now a sour thread of vinegar and lye runs through it like a commentary. You move along Vicolo del Buco and count doors with chalk marks, some for warning, some for memory, the meaning not always agreed. A child's hand has smudged one into something like a star. Above, on a pulley arm, a basket hangs where a family has decided news is safer traded by rope than by mouth. It creaks once, turns, and waits for the neighbor across to pull his line taut and send back a wedge of cured pork in a folded scrap. Your boy is feverish? Keep him warm. We will pray at none. And the guild signs look down on an emptied audience. A bundle of wool carved in stone over the carter's house. A brush and a pot for the painter's quarter. Keys for locksmiths, a sheaf for grain dealers. Behind one door, the Arte della Lana would normally argue prices for fleece from the Maremma and beyond, weighing the year's rains and the shearer's luck. Today, the scale pans are dark and still. In a dyer's narrow atelier, vats that once breathed color, woads blue, matters red, welds yellow, are lidded. Cloths that should have been lifted, rinsed, and beaten hang heavy, a rain of color arrested mid-fall. The dyer runs a finger over a ridged board used for fulling and wipes the dust on his apron, then frowns at his own hand as if it had betrayed him with proof of idleness. A tanner's lane, usually exiled to where water runs and noses are less delicate, carries a ghost of its old reek. Lime pits, scraped hides, dog dung saved for softening, stale urine kept for the same. Work without workers decays into smell and memory. A woman with a scarf over her mouth passes quickly, the hem of her brown gown lifted with one finger so it won't drink from the gutter. She does not look at the door, where a bent nail holds a rosary with 2 beads missing. Near the mercanzia, where the city's merchants negotiate disputes and measure measures, a notice is pasted in a neat hand and sealed with a wafer of wax the color of dried cherries. It speaks of order and of not gathering in numbers, though the exact text varies from city to city and the copyists argue over phrasing. Siena's 9 have no interest in panic, but neither can they order a pestilence to observe statutes. An additional line, shorter and more human, asks that the poor be given alms in bread, not coin, and that those who distribute it do so with a cloth over the face. Whether this was written today or yesterday is hard to tell. The paper has taken on the city's damp and curled at a corner. At the corner by the goldsmiths, shutters are half down, like eyelids. Work as delicate as theirs, filigree vines, saints on rings, reliquary saints even smaller, requires light and steadiness, neither of which the present day gives freely. One bench still holds a tiny saw set into a bow of wood. Filings glitter on the leather apron tacked to the edge of the table so that nothing precious is lost. A journeyman steps out to piss against a wall he would usually avoid because of the guild's fines. He glances up as if the city could see and pull a note from its sleeve to charge him. No one comes. He fastens his hose and pulls the shutter all the way down. Bankers were once Siena's boast and warning, families who could lend to princes and plan cities on ledgers. The older names still live in stone on palazzi that look like fortresses trimmed for marriage. A servant sweeps one step, neat arcs of ash and grit falling to the street like a remembered sum. Inside, the counting tables are covered with cloth. The abacus sits like a chessboard, waiting for grief to make a move. Letters come still from the road, from San Gimignano, from Perugia, from far beyond. But the wax seals speak the same news in different hands. Trade dulls where ports fear, caravans divide to avoid quarantine towns. Trust grows short. At a well, a woman lowers her bucket with her foot on the rope to break the fall. She looks at the carved rim and sees the notches where so many feet have done the same. When the bucket comes up, she draws the rope across her hand with the practiced twist that keeps skin and fiber honest with one another. "Boil it," a neighbor says. The friar says a capful of vinegar beats bad air. "The friar says many things," she replies without malice, and sets the bucket on a little wooden disc so the bottom never touches the ground. You pass an alley that smells of sumac and alum, tannins and mordants, the chemistry of color before chemistry has a name. In better times, apprentices would chant recipes to fix them in the mind. For woad, beat and ferment, then raise. For matter, never boil. For weld, keep it sweet. Today the only voice is a boy in the dark, counting letters carved into a wall. His own game to pass the hour, because he has been told not to run. A lay confraternity meets in a hall with frescoes of saints who look like citizens and citizens who look like saints. They would normally take up tasks that make a city civil, arranging dowries for poor girls, burying those who die without coin, offering bread and a hand to steady the old. The benches are set in their usual order, but the men who occupy them sit farther apart, with hands in sleeves as if keeping warmth inside their own tunics could prove wise in other ways. A chest stands open for alms. The coins make a flatter sound when dropped than they did last month. A clerk reads names of those to be visited and those to be left a loaf at the door, no knocking. He does not lift his eyes when he says left at the door, because he knows the one who should open it may be gone. The painters' botege keep odd hours even in ordinary seasons. In this one, a master is already awake. He rubs gesso into a panel and squints the way a man does who has learned to see two things at once. What is there and what will be there. He prepares bowl for gold leaf, red earth that will glow under hammered light, and smooths it with a knuckle where an apprentice would have used a too eager palm. A messenger from the palace brought word yesterday that a civic commission may be delayed. This is both expected and not. The master opens a box of pigments and closes it again, as if shutting the sky. He will come back to his saints when the city remembers how to look at their hands. On the slope toward Porta Ovile, A woman selling onions has set out 3 bunches instead of 9. She has learned that showing more excites the envy of those who can buy none. And envy is as catching as any air. The greens are clean. She has washed them in a pail with a spoonful of vinegar. Not because she is sure it helps, but because she is sure of doing. A man stops, touches a stem, and withdraws his hand without buying. He mutters something about prices. She does not answer, not because she is ashamed, but because her throat is tired of explaining arithmetic to hunger. Word travels in Siena, not only by crier and edict, but by surface. A smear of ash on a lintel says a house has burned juniper against miasma. A sprig of rue tied in red thread says someone within believes plants and color have alliances. A bit of cloth nailed to a door says a servant went out with a message and has not yet come back. None of these are certain texts, and yet they are read. The bell keeps its count, and the count keeps its bell. A breeze walks the ridge and fails to move what fear has fixed. Down a lane no wider than a cart's axle, a vinegar seller rattles his ladle against the lip of a keg and calls out that there is still enough for those who wish to wash their floors, their hands, their throats with a spoonful in water. Voices answer from behind shutters, some asking price, some asking if he can leave a jar and not knock. He nods to empty air and lifts the ladle. The street holds its breath, as if the city is about to choose between the council of cloth and the council of hunger. The city that once woke to the smell of new bread now wakes to the thought of it. Flour is arithmetic, grain in, loaves out, hands to knead, wood to fire, time enough for the dome of dough to rise. When numbers fail, bread fails. Still, habit keeps a shape. At the forno off Via di Città, the baker has marked the first loaves with the sign of his paddle. 3 shortcuts, like a trident, so customers can tell his bread from another's, if loaves are moved about in charity. He cools them on a rack near the door, where fresh air might deny them any rumor of sickness, then sets aside the customary pain for the hospital. The ledger of his obligations has grown thin, but he keeps it. You stand outside with others who prefer to buy at distance. Coin left in a shallow bowl, loaf lifted with a cloth. Vinegar cuts the morning. Each person's jar smells a little different. Juniper, rosemary, or rue, because every household has invented a recipe in the absence of proof. The baker's boy sets a bowl of water by the threshold and tips a capful of vinegar into it, the surface shivering. The act steadies him. When a woman asks whether yesterday's flour had any mustiness, mice, damp, he shakes his head quickly. She buys 2 small loaves instead of 1, then pauses, puts one back, and buys a handful of chickpeas, the cheaper certainty. Along the lane, shutters show narrow mouths where voices negotiate. People who never counted pulses now count spoonfuls. A widow trades an iron candlestick for a measure of barley. She lays the candlestick on the scale pan and does not watch the weights but the barley falling, sound by sound, into her sack. A man who has kept bees offers a little wax. The apothecary melts it with resin to make a better seal for letters that must still fly between officials, physicians, and parishes. Vinegar has become the city's second river. It runs across floors, through cloths, down throats, in small bracing sips that make eyes water. The friar recommends rinsing hands after visiting the sick. The physician disagrees, saying dampness opens the body to bad airs. A mother compromises. She warms the water first and whispers a prayer to Saint Sebastian, who understands arrows and may therefore understand invisible ones. She does not say the prayer aloud. The wall can hear too much. At a corner, smoke stains the brick where a brazier has burned for hours. The family within has followed advice to fumigate rooms. Juniper first, then rosemary, then a little laurel if they can spare any. The smoke lets them feel they are doing something more active than waiting. They move from chamber to chamber, trailing the brazier on a tile. Ashes tick like light rain. The air sweetens without promising anything. When the youngest coughs, the mother lifts him and turns him toward the window, so the cough goes out rather than in. That theory is no worse than others. The miasma of the age is not only air, it is certainty spoken with too much force. A visiting doctor in a fine saddlecloth makes rounds with a set of prescriptions he claims were copied from Salerno and perfected at Montpellier. Avoid fruit, avoid sleep in the daytime, avoid sorrow if possible. He says this last without irony. Avoid baths, the pores open. Avoid meat heavy with blood. Do not turn your face directly into the wind. Carry rue in a pouch at the breast. Walk in gardens if you have them. Laugh, though gently. To those who argue, he speaks Latin. To those who cannot, he speaks scent, offering packets of crushed herbs tied in linen and sold for a few deniers each. A man buys one not because he trusts the theory, but because the smell of mint makes him think of afternoons that had room in them. Food becomes instruction as much as sustenance. In kitchens spare as chapels, pots hold beans and water, a bay leaf, maybe an onion. Oil is added late, a thread of brightness over duller things. Pepper is hoarded like gossip. Bread is sliced thinner than custom, then floated on broth so the bowl looks fuller than it is. Children who once hated the heel learn to love it because it holds up to soaking. Wine is watered, then touched with a spoon of vinegar to make it taste like a decision. At the hospital, the broth thins and stretches. Donated saffron, tiny tongues of sun, goes into the pot, not for medicine, but for morale. In the orphan court, older girls tear yesterday's linen into strips for wiping and tie their hair with string, because ribbons on a day like this feel like a sin against arithmetic. The kitchen scrapes are saved for a second stock that will go to those waiting outside the hospital doors who are not sick enough to be admitted and not well enough to stand there long. The porter sets a line on the stone with a piece of charcoal and asks people not to cross it. The line won't stop a sickness, but it can stop a shove. On the ridge by the Duomo, men who sell vegetables have learned to lay their goods in measured heaps, not piles. 9 onions, 12 turnips, a small triangle of fennel. A woman buys the fennel because she has heard it sweetens breath and therefore life. She chews the seeds and pretends they work. An argument begins over the price of leeks, a song Siena knows by heart, and the seller lifts his hands in the clean gesture of, "Then take the smaller bunch." He does not lower his voice as he would have last month. Shame is expensive to maintain when fear is already dear. Perfume, which used to be more play than practice, becomes both. A goldsmith who cannot work for lack of commissions opens his pomander, little sphere of filigree on a chain, inner cups filled with civet, ambergris, grains of musk, and replaces the contents with what he can afford: crushed rosemary, a bit of orris root, a splash of vinegar to wake them. He hangs it near his nose and breathes as if the correct scent might edit the world. The city watches him and does not laugh. Flags of advice multiply. Some families hang bunches of hyssop in windows and burn lavender until the walls smell like fields. Others keep windows shuttered all day, believing that light carries danger the way it carries dust. A small notice appears at the edge of the campo, asking that those who have fevers keep to their parishes and not wander. The notice curls, the wind thinks for it. Toward evening, the bread that remains grows stale, and stale bread is a virtue because it waits while the living are delayed. A woman washing the common stairs wrings her cloth extra hard and says to the child helping her, "We wash the steps as if they could be clean enough for saints, even if all that walks them is us." The child asks whether saints have to walk at all. The woman answers without meaning to, "Not in this weather." The day's centerpiece is simple and terrible. The air itself feels like a decision no one can make well. A family debates whether to sleep in one room for warmth or in 2 for space, whether to eat well once or poorly twice, whether to send a message now or hope for an errand when someone is already headed toward that part of the city. The father lifts the lid of the chest where the good cloth lies and then closes it. They will not cut it yet for shrouds. The mother lays out 5 bowls and hesitates, then takes one away because she will carry the baby instead. When darkness leans in, the bell rehearses its slower count. Somewhere, in a loggia with law painted on the walls in scenes of horsemen, judges, dancers, and citizens, the great fresco that tells Siena how to behave when it is itself. The men who govern set 2 candles side by side and draw closer to the flame. They will measure the day in edicts and exemptions, in loaves and carts, in how words address air. The city holds its breath, waiting to see what their arithmetic can promise against the arithmetic of the bell. Morning comes to the Palazzo Pubblico with a sobriety the brick already knows how to wear. The facade looks straight into the campo, as if weighing it. The Torre del Mangia stands beside like a reed that learned stone. Inside, stairs carry the quiet up to rooms that have practiced government for decades. Wax has a smell even when it is cold. A clerk touches a seal with the back of his fingernail and sets it aside, the way a man tests the readiness of bread. You enter with the light that reaches only as far as the first table. Beyond, candles make a second daylight, small, warm, and purchased at the cost of tallow. The 9 sit at their places, cloaks folded with the economy of men who have learned to spend attention only once. They are merchants by habit and magistrates by office. Siena's long bet that those who love order will keep it. Their faces carry the city's ledger in miniature, sleep lost to petitions, to messengers, to nights burning with the new arithmetic. The first business is the list of parishes, read aloud in a cadence that tries for calm. San Donato, Sant'Agostino, San Pellegrino, San Martino. Numbers attach themselves like burrs to every name. How many carts arrived at the hospital before prime? How many loaves were claimed at the bread stoop? How many bodies required lime and space? One of the 9 asks that numbers not be sung, and the clerk nods and drops his voice to plain speech. No one says the list is longer than yesterday. The candle gutters briefly and says it. Against the southern wall, Ambrogio Lorenzetti's fresco looks on with the patience of paint. The allegory of good government has lived here for nearly a decade, telling Siena what it believes about itself. Justice weighing scales, concord drawing citizens together by a single rope, security promising love of the common good, fields beyond city walls worked by hands that trust the future. The figures do not move. In the painted street, a bride goes to her marriage. In the chamber where men breathe, carts go to the hospital stairs. Grain, says one, a reminder more than a topic. The city must eat to be a city. The official charge with storerooms and contracts, once an unglamorous post, has risen in importance with a speed that would have been comic another year. He reports that the public granaries are sound, the sacks protected from damp, the keys counted each evening. He has sent a rider to Asciano to confirm the Maremma routes and another to Monteriggioni to ask whether the garrison's stores can spare what they promised last autumn. Prices want to rise, fear gives them license. The 9 instruct him to hold prices of bread at a known measure and to publish the weight of loaves each morning. If we must shave the loaf, one says, we shall shave honestly and in public. Next, crowds. The proclamation from yesterday, the one asking that processions be deferred, that confraternities pray in smaller numbers, that mourners accompany the dead with fewer torches and more space, has helped but not enough. People imagine that walking together persuades God faster. A Dominican sent a note urging that prayers not be forbidden, only directed. We forbid nothing that trues the heart, says another of the 9, but we will not feed panic with spectacle. The clerk drafts language meant to sound like permission while behaving like prevention. A physician is admitted, his robe a small flourish in a room that prefers its colors to be laws. He talks of air and putrefaction, of constellations and the unlucky conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter earlier in the year, matters that some at the table quietly file under comfort to those who like reasons. He also talks of simpler things: keep the streets swept, spread lime where carts have left their mark, burn juniper in crowded places, and move the brazier, lest the smoke simply settle. He recommends apothecaries be forbidden to sell false theriac. You would not believe what goes into some of it, and asks that barbers be reminded not to open veins in the fevered, unless required by those who will answer for it. One of the 9 raises an eyebrow. Will you answer for it? The physician meets the question and does not lie. When I am sure, I will say so. Letters arrive as if the air were a road. From Florence, the pestilence has come as if it had always known the street plan. The writers implore Siena not to send messengers without cause. From Pisa, ships mean hunger when they cannot unload, and the port has learned to love small boats. From the Contado, the countryside that feeds the city, labor is thin, oxen have become treasure. A village asks whether the city will accept its cart of beans if the driver keeps his hood drawn and speaks to no one. The 9 answer yes, and add that the cart should come at dawn when fewer feet are about. A wax seal takes the imprint of the city's wolf, and the heat rises sweet and faint. The centerpiece of the hour is a visit to the Sala dei Nove, where the fresco of good government opens to countryside. A painted landscape of peasants sewing, merchants walking, dancers turning in piazzas, builders erecting walls soberly and well. The 9 do not walk here for comfort. They walk here for instruction. To govern in a room with that wall is to sit under a mirror that never stops reflecting. One of them stands before the figure of security, her scroll promising that those who live under good rule may go freely without fear. We cannot give the people that freedom today, he says, but we can give them the shape of it. And he writes on a tablet, fewer night watches but better placed, bread in loaves of stated weight, carts with lime to follow where carts with bodies go, alms in bread, not coin, a notice that strangers from infected towns must speak with the porter at the gate before taking a bed. No one says the word quarantine. It belongs to other cities and later years. They say prudence, and write it like a law. A captain of the watch arrives, boots showing the Campo's grit. He reports that the vinegar seller has been harried for his prices and that a brawl over onions at Porta Ovile ended with a broken tooth and a broken promise to remain civil. He asks for leave to set a line with charcoal at the hospital's threshold so those waiting for broth and those bearing the sick do not mix. Granted. He asks whether the bell should change its count in the night to mark when carts may pass without neighbors gathering to name the dead. The 9 hold still. Counting is comfort and injury both. After the quiet, they agree. The slow bell shall continue, but carts will move near midnight, and torches must be few. A clerk reads a proposal from one of the guilds that the city suspend work on the Duomo Nuovo, the grand extension of the cathedral, a decision the masons have already made with their absent hands. The stones will not walk away, the proposal says, and for a moment a smile crosses 2 of the 9, because humor that costs nothing is a small mercy. It is resolved, the funds set aside for marble shall be diverted to grain and to the hospital's kitchen until feast days return to their proper meaning. Before the candles are snuffed, a messenger from Santa Maria della Scala is shown in, hair damp at the temples. He asks for more linen and for permission to use a plot of ground beyond the walls for pits when the hospital yard cannot hold any more. No one pretends this request is other than it is. The scribe writes quickly. The seal is pressed while the wax still breathes, and the messenger goes. On the stairs, the breeze from the Campo meets the warm air from the chamber and trades places. Below, the square waits like a broad palm. The 9 step out one by one, cloaks clasped, faces learning an expression that says both governance and grief. Behind them, in paint, the bride and the dancers keep turning. The bell hesitates between one count and the next, as if the city is listening for an answer to a question it has not yet found the courage to ask. The bottega wakes before the Campo does. Light noses in at a high window, pooled thin on a bench where a panel lies sleeping under gesso like snow. A grindstone ticks as it turns. A muller kisses pigment to paste. You smell glue size cooling in a pot, rabbit skin, and time made into syrup. You hear a broom's slow conversation with the floor. Straw on plank, because dust is the enemy of gold. A master dips a thumb and tests the gesso's skin. He is one of Siena's many, unrecorded by name, obedient to the same grammar that has trained hands here for 2 generations. Duccio's wide-lidded Madonnas, Simone Martini's tender lines that made speech almost visible, Ambrogio Lorenzetti's patient cities that know how to dance and plow at once. Those great names live in paint dry enough to ignore fear. The living must learn to paint with it. Panels come from poplar, joined stiff and true, their seams cross-braced lest the year's damp persuade them to wander. First linen, glued and taut to settle the wood, then gesso grosso, gesso sottile, coat sanded until the surface answers with a faint, even breath under the nail. Bole waits nearby in a dish, the red earth that will make gold leaf warm rather than cold. A row of punches lies by the cushion. Stars, suns, little flowers, tools that make halos ring like hammered light. The apprentices are fewer than last month. One has gone home to a parish near Porta Tufi and has not been seen. One coughs in the mornings and says nothing until he speaks. The boy who remains sharpens a goose quill for pouncing, pricking a cartoon so the outline can be powdered onto wet plaster when a wall is ready. Few walls are ready. Fresco loves teams and time. The city has room for neither. Panel painting suits a narrower hour and a smaller audience. And so, the bottega turns to it. Icons for bedchambers, small saints to hang where hands rest on door frames, tabernacles to fold shut when fear asks for privacy. Pigments sit in shells like a sea moved indoor. Azurite, the honest blue that Siena uses when lapis is too dear. Vermilion like hot brick, red lead that glows with a risky appetite. Orpiment, yellow and dangerous. Green earth, quiet as fields after rain. Lead white, the color of rule. The master measures with the prejudice of long habit, for tempera wants proportions remembered in muscle, not argued on parchment. Egg yolk binds, water loosens, a touch of wine flatters the brush. Everything breathes in a circle of reach and sight. A messenger came yesterday to say a confraternity wants a banner, Madonna della Misericordia, sheltering citizens beneath her mantle, wide and blue as a Siena sky in years when skies mattered. The master nodded and did not ask which citizens. He has learned, in a month, that commissions now carry the pronoun we in more urgent tones. He chalks a rectangle on the ground and draws the arc of a mantle that will one day feel both cloth and heaven. Hands will fit under it. A midwife, a grocer, a friar whose eyes hold tired light, perhaps a clerk with ink on his thumb. Not portraits, not inventions, but types, the city's own faces in more formal grammar. Color in Siena is not confined to paint. Even today, as shutters bite their own light, memory insists on banners from feast days when the contrade, parishes turned neighborhoods turned small republics of affection, lifted their beasts and colors to the campo. The painters have marched those flags out of linen and love, oak and dragon, wave and wolf. Now the same hands rub verdigris into a sacramental line and find their voices doing the old thing, explaining to an apprentice why blue goes last, why a red dirties everything, why gold leaf must be breathed on to float free from the book. The talk steadies the hour. The city beyond the door also paints, with smoke on brick and vinegar on stone. Dyer's vats are still, but their colors haunt the lane as shadows. Wode's thoughtful blue, Weld's hay-bright yellow. In better weather, a boy would carry a skein like a captured river between poles, and women would turn to watch simply because color is a ceremony even when nothing else is. Today, a woman passes with a bunch of onions, and their green is the loudest thing for 30 paces. Siena still answers to color even when it eats less of it. News in the bottega is a patter of pigment and rumor. Simone died at Avignon 4 years ago, someone says, and the master nods. Old news, but comforting for being plain, like a fixed star. Of Ambrogio, another begins and does not finish. The city whispers that the author of Good Government is among those the bell has counted in 1348. It may be true. It may be one of grief's ways of dragging excellence back into dust where it can keep company with everyone else. The master paints his mantle wider. If Ambrogio is gone, the wall remains, and the wall is a teacher. The centerpiece of the day begins when the bowl is laid and breathed upon. A thin cloud of warmth rises from the master's mouth. The leaf takes and shivers like a captured sun. He taps it down with a squirrel hair tip and coaxes edges to meet. Then the halo, a firm circle scribed with a compass, a border pricked, the field punched with stars. Not randomly, never randomly. The rhythm matters as much as the light. When the master lifts the panel to see how the gold receives the room, the bottega answers like a chapel. Even the boy who coughs waits to cough until the breath can't be kept in. Faces come last, not because they are unimportant, but because they are most important. Egg tempera dries fast and bright. It prefers conviction to fiddling. The master floats thin shadows under noses and along the soft run of lips. Siena's saints carry a sweetness that is not indulgence. They look at the viewer with a regard that makes room for the viewer's day. This Madonna will tilt her head only by the degree needed to say, "I see you," and no more. Under her mantle will stand citizens with the neat anonymity of the saved, not named, not counted, not ranked, only gathered. Outside, the bell sets a new interval. The apprentices pause as if the sound also fixed lines. A woman appears at the doorframe with her veil pinned under her chin, the way one does who expects to bend and lift. Her hands smell of rosemary and smoke. She asks if the banner could be readied sooner. The hospital wishes to carry it along the loggia and back. A small procession of 3 or 4, no more, to ask for steady hearts in the wards. The master says he can gild now and paint later, so the cloth will have its light. She bows, no words spared, and goes. The bottega returns to its narrow weather, brush, breath, leaf, then vermilion edges to the mantle, so blue will feel warmer when it comes. The boy who coughs grinds a little azurite and thinks of the river, which wears that color when the wind leans it the right way. He glances at the door as if expecting the wind, then back at the shell because the master taught him to look at what keeps the hand honest. By late afternoon, the panel has a face the city would recognize even with wet eyes. The master signs nothing, few do, and presses small tool marks along the mantle's hem. A row of grains, a row of leaf, a row of flower, as if telling cloth how to be precious. He instructs the boy to cut holes along the banner's top edge and thread a cord. The wood will ride with cloth today, then return to be finished when hours are more obedient. He says this as if hours could remember obedience, because the bottega is a school for hope as much as for technique. A footfall stops at the threshold, then another. The hospital porter has come uphill out of breath, lime dust in the crease of his elbow. He looks at the gold that has turned the room to afternoon and says only, "Now, if you can." Behind him, the bell gathers itself again, as if the city is about to carry its colors through air thick with reasons not to. The hospital spreads itself along the cathedral slope like a long palm held out to the city. Halls placed finger to finger, courts like knuckles, stairs the patient lines in a tired hand. Its stone remembers pilgrims' boots and birthing cries, and the winter scrape of stretchers. Today it also holds the regular puncture of the bell. The porter has climbed fast with the banner under his arm, gold still tender where the master's breath set it. He rests only long enough to nod, and then carries it down the inner stair that bends twice before the long ward opens. The ward has its own climate. Light drops from high windows and flat sheets, turning the lime-swept floor to a pale shore and the pallets into small islands. The smell is layered and honest. Vinegar and boiled linen, tallow, rosemary, straw. Voices are low because breath is coin. A sister lifts her head when the porter arrives and gives that almost invisible assent of a woman whose hands are busy but whose attention travels farther than her reach. She has a name at baptism and another in the ward. The second is simply sister, and it fits more hours. On the wall, a painted virgin from an earlier season looks down with the severity of love. Siena places her everywhere like a promise written in blue. The porter and the friar who keeps this hall lift the banner and fix its pole into the brackets that once held a lamp. Gold finds the motes. The room brightens not by much, but by enough. Patients who can turn their heads do. Some look at the halo, some at the mantle's hem, where the master pressed his pattern of grains and leaves. Under that painted cloth, people recognize themselves by type and be still for a breath. The hospital is not a single house, but a small city with its own map. Past this ward, an open court takes air. Under the arcade, a line of buckets waits for water. A bakery turns thin loaves morning and afternoon, and the smell drifts like reassurance to places where the spoon cannot yet follow. The pharmacy, the spezieria, keeps jars lettered in a clerk's tidy hand. RVR, ROS Mar, Hyasop Vs, My R. The apothecary will mix virtues as carefully as any painter mixes color, measuring in pinches and drops and hope. He knows which jar holds a lie sold to him as theriac and keeps it at the back for those who demand to be fooled. Better they have a story than a poison. No one pretends the wards are only for the plague. They were built for need in its common clothes. Broken bones from falls on the steep lanes. Babies whose mothers ran out of milk before a rain came to sweeten grass. Old men who grasped the stairs with both hands and still lost. Those needs continue and make the arithmetic of this season crueler. A woman labors in a smaller chamber that prefers quiet, her face damp with the clean sheen of work the body chose. The midwife keeps her hands ready and her voice lower than the wind. When the child comes, angry and human, the midwife spits lightly on the thumb, an old, harmless habit, and touches the tiny lip as if telling it the world it has joined. Somewhere else a cough finishes a man, and the bell finds the measure between these truths. Near the side door, a niche set into the wall holds a small shelf. Once, and perhaps still, mothers have left infants there when hunger or shame or calculation made their arms too weak. Whether a turnable wheel belongs to this century or later is a thing the city will argue when its eyes stop stinging. For now, a sister checks the niche as she passes, not often, not ostentatiously, simply as a way of agreeing with Providence that chance should be given a place to rest. Today the niche holds only a folded scrap with a ribbon inside, a sign that someone hopes the future will remember a color. In the long hall, the ritual of keeping continues. Straw is shaken, sheets stretched, bowls lifted, heads turned toward air. The friar moves from pallet to pallet with a humility that has nothing to prove. He says brief words where ears can still receive them, and shorter ones where they cannot. If a man wants the words of his parish, he will fetch them if he can. If not, he gives what is shared by all parishes and accepted by most hearts. He keeps a list in his sleeve of houses that need bread left at the door, and a second list, smaller, of those who should have a watcher at night. He gives the second to the porter without comment. The porter nods as if given a cord to tie around a task. The centerpiece of the day arrives on wheels. 2 carts, one for the living, one empty and already whitening at its seams where lime dried and cracked. The first stops at the threshold and breathes. The driver lifts his cap with the embarrassed dignity of a man who has learned a trade he did not wish. The sisters arrange their faces into welcome that never pretends surprise. They lift, steady, count under their breath. A girl whose fever has drunk her tears stares past the ceiling, at something the ceiling cannot hold. A sister wipes her forehead and tells her there will be broth later with saffron, as if naming color could bend appetite. The clerk meets the cart with ink already tamed to write. He asks a name when one can be had, a mark when it cannot. Parish if known, house if remembered, work if it might help someone find them when the hour tilts the other way. Spinner, says a woman for her sister, and the clerk writes it as if the word itself were a thread that could draw the world tighter. He does not write afraid. That entry is everywhere already. A physician, sleeves rolled, looks into one mouth and then another, as if the throat could offer him an answer it withholds from others. He speaks less today than yesterday. No Lansings, he says, not that one. To another, if it must be cut, cut small. And he asks for fresh linens and then looks ashamed for asking, as if he had tried to borrow weather. The sister with the vinegar cloth answers him with a nod, neither humble nor proud. It means only we heard. Toward none, the banner moves again. The friar and the porter lift it from the brackets and carry it along the loggia, step by slow step, so those at the far pallets can see it in their own slice of air. A murmur follows like a tide drawing its own name. Under the painted mantle a familiar city stands. No faces, yet every face. A man who has kept his eyes tight for hours opens them because gold has found its way along the wall and into the corner where he lies. For a moment, the ward breathes in time with the banner's pace. Outside, the carts wait for what the ward will decide. The empty one holds lime in a half-open bag, powder soft as confession. Two men sit on the curb with their hands hanging uselessly between their knees. They wore those hands out earlier, making a pit neat and large enough for decency. One flicks grit from his palm as if it were arithmetic he could change. They will have work before vespers. By late afternoon, the kitchen sends broth again, the saffron bright as ever a city made. The bowls make their round, the spoon is wiped between mouths. The sister's arm learns to hold the exact weight of a head without letting gratitude spill. A bell in the cathedral sounds a single clear note that finds its way through the windows up high. The ward looks that direction without thought, like plants turning. The friar sets the banner back in its place and feels, against the pole, the faint heat that breath left in the gold. The porter steps into the yard and lifts the bar for a man with a shovel and a face already powdered with lime. Down the slope, the man says, meaning the ground outside the walls, meaning space that is not yet full. The porter looks past him toward the stair, where a boy waits with a message pinned to his cap, so he will not lose it, even if his thoughts jump from fear to hunger and back again. The boy's mouth moves as he rehearses the route to a house that may not answer. The bell draws breath. The carts shift their weight. The yard holds still as the city listens for whether the slow count will begin before the first torch is lit. Before the carts move, the city holds the pose of decision, the way a hand hovers over a chessboard when every square seems the wrong one. Then the mule snorts, shakes its harness, and the day commits. Wheel rims, iron against stone, make a sound Siena will remember longer than songs. Men lift the shafts. The cart rolls from the hospital yard into the lane. Past the charcoal line the captain of the watch drew to keep need from crowding itself. The cart for the living went first this morning. The cart for the dead follows now. Its boards are scrubbed white where lime has burned truth into grain. A shovel rests across the tailboard like a blunt cross. Two men walk beside, neither masked as later prints will claim, only scarfed, sleeves rolled, eyes steady in the hard manner of those who learned a trade they did not want. They are not outcasts or saints. They are citizens answering a city, and the city, in return, will try to remember their names. Lime waits in a sack, powder fine as crushed bone. It has a clean, sour scent that offends and reassures at once. The men have learned its manners, how to shake it so the wind does not take it, how to keep it from their throats and yet give it to the ground generously. In the yard behind Santa Maria della Scala, they practice the rhythm that keeps dignity intact. Lift, spread, turn, speak the short word that means ready. No liturgy has been written for this work. They borrow one from patience. The cart stops first at a parish where the bell rope has burned grooves in palms. A door opens not all the way. Within, a face appears and then another. Grief has made both practical. The men do not enter. The household brings the body wrapped in its own linen, the cloth pinned at shoulder and knee, the way mothers pin swaddling, the way tailors pin a seam. A prayer is said in a voice from behind a shutter across the lane. Some neighbor could not keep silence entirely. The men lift, not showily, not gently. Gently lies, but with that exactness work teaches when weight must be borne, as if watched by law. The cloth is set, so that the face is covered and the cord secured with the knot the friar taught. The knot that undoes cleanly if kin meet the cart outside the walls and ask for the last look. Lime sifts from the shovel over the cart bed, a thin veil, not to erase but to promise. The men have been told that lime keeps smell obedient and speed possible. They do not argue with the sort of chemistry that feels like decent behavior given form. A second household signals with a cloth at the window, a mark folded oddly, meaning, "Later, send a watcher, we have 2 sick, not yet gone." The driver nods, and one of the men scratches the sign into the dirt with his boot, so memory has a place to sit until he returns to the hospital to report. Down the slope, the city tilts toward its gates. Carts move best on the early light because fear sleeps shallow and wakes easily. At Porta Romana, a guard steps aside without ceremony. He notes the time in a small book. He does not ask for names now because words are expensive when breath is. Past the wall, fields open like an idea the city once had about tomorrow. Patches of winter wheat make their careful green. A woman walking with a bundle on her back turns away and crosses herself, not to refuse the cart, but to admit she has no words for it that would help. The ground chosen lies beyond the first row of olive trees, where the soil turns from red to a leaner brown. The men have been here already, yesterday, the day before, days that stack like boards. Pits are not holes. They are rooms prepared under the open sky. Each is squared as well as haste allows, the sides pitched so rain will climb out rather than down. It is not a common grave because nothing about what's common feels common yet. It is a series of beds where the city lays its citizens like rows of punctuation that insist the sentence must continue. They lift the first wrapped body down, ease it to the bed with a hand under the shoulder, another at the hip. One man makes the sign he keeps for this moment only. The other says a name if there is one. Lime follows, a soft door closing that will open no more. When the second body comes, they leave a breadth of earth between, not for superstition, simply because space seems right. The shovel whispers, the sack lightens, the air stings. The men step back and let the world be larger than their reach for a count of 5, the count a bell taught them, then set the next measures of earth and powder. They work without speeches. They do not argue the stars or the wind or the sins of cities. They argue angles, shovels, the placement of a plank so weight can ride without tearing what wraps it. When a cord slips, they tighten it. When a corner of linen loosens, they tuck it as tailors do. This is the morality offered to those who lift. Do the thing well that cannot be done beautifully. A boy from the hospital has followed at a distance with a jar of vinegar and a rag he keeps for the handle of the shovel, his own ritual, untaught. He stands where the men have told him to stay and does not step into the square of work until called. When they do call, he brings the jar with 2 hands and waits for the rag to come back wet and heavy with a small victory. It feels like the world can be held and improved for a minute. The men let him feel that. Work is instruction. They are old enough to know that a boy needs a use he can name. At noon, a thin ribbon of sound arrives from the walls. A bell, not the slow count for plague dead, but a single note from the Duomo, as if the city wished to inform the fields that it still exists. The men take off their caps without looking up. They have learned to save their necks for lifting. One eats a heel of bread dipped in vinegar. The other swallows water and coughs, because water alone feels too naked. The boy chews fennel seeds the hospital cook gave him and pretends the taste is strength. The centerpiece of their day arrives like weather. A pair of figures at the field's edge, heads covered, stepping carefully between furrows that have nothing to do with the pits. They have the particular stillness of those who would like to run and do not. Kin, no other word fits. The men put down their tools and wait. The figures stop at a respectful distance and ask without asking. The driver nods toward the second row, the third bed. He loosens a knot. The cloth folds back just enough. The figures do not wail. Law and dignity conspire against it here. One reaches, does not touch, draws breath that will be stored for years, says a name once the way an oath is said, and lets the cloth fall. The men do not hurry them, but they do not let time pool either. Time must move, or the city will drown in it. When the row is finished, earth returns. The shovel's back is used to tamp, firm, press. Lime makes a thin crust when the sun meets it, a pale seal. One man writes a mark on a stake, parish initials, day's number, so the ward clerk can marry paper to ground later if anyone asks. They set the stake at the row's head. No stone yet. Stones come after arithmetic. The cart turns homeward lighter in a way that feels wrong to notice. The men climb on, boots white to the ankle. The boy walks behind, jar held to his chest. At the gate, the guard nods again and gestures them through. Inside the walls, smell changes from earth to vinegar and human kitchens. A woman with a pail steps aside and stares at their shoes as if lime itself could teach her how to keep a floor safe. Toward the hospital slope, the bell falters and then resumes as if deciding between one duty and another. Farther up, a different sound gathers, voices braided, measured, not loud. A banner, blue, gold, trembling where breath set it, tilts into view along the loggia. A small procession, 3 or 4, no more, rounds the corner, and prayer moves through air that has learned to doubt it. The cart slows, the men set down the shafts, and for a heartbeat Siena hesitates, between the arithmetic of lime and the grammar of mercy. The banner breathes like a sail in a courtyard without wind. Blue mantle, the master's gold still warm where breath set it, lifts and settles as the friar and the porter pace the loggia. They do not sing loudly. Siena has rules now about numbers and nearness, but it has older rules about asking help. The lauda they choose is one that any mouth can carry without rehearsal, the kind of line that pitches itself just under grief and stays there. A sister follows with a handbell, struck only at turns, a silver heartbeat that argues for order. You walk beside them because the ward has made a road through the hospital and the road needs feet. The smell is part incense, part rosemary, part something like rain that never arrives. Faces turn where they can, a ripple of looking that reaches patience the way sun crosses a floor. The friar speaks between verses, never long enough to make breath a debt. For steady hands, a pause. For those on the road, another. For the ones who cannot answer when we knock. He is not bargaining. He is telling the day what its shape should be. They carry the banner down the inner stair and into the yard. On the wall, a notice from the 9 asks that prayers be kept in smaller rings and that torches be few. The friar touches the parchment lightly, not in defiance, but as a man touches a doorframe when leaving a house he respects. 4 people, then 5 if the sister with the bell counts. The circle holds. The yard's gate opens. The city receives the blue. Beyond the hospital's slope, sound thickens. A group from a confraternity waits at the edge of the campo, faces divided between relief and the modest pride of being first to answer a task no one wants. Their tabard colors are quieted with ash, so they do not look like feast day. Their banner shows a tall cross and 2 small loaves, emblem of ordinary mercy. They do not scatter like a parade. They lengthen themselves to keep air between bodies, as if air were an animal that needs room to turn. The friar nods thanks without words. The circle widens by 1 and then tightens again. On the steps of the Palazzo Pubblico, a constable of the watch stands with his cap in his hand, neither forbidding nor joining, the compromise the 9 asked for when they weighed prayer against crowd. A clerk beside him counts under his breath, not people, but space. So many paces between, so many paces around the turn, a gap left at the mouth of the lane so carts can pass if they must. Governance works today in measures of air. The procession proceeds as water does when it finds a channel. The lauda runs on the lower edge of speech. Madonna, keep your mantle wide. Give us 1 more hour of steadiness. Teach our feet the road between. A woman at a window repeats the 3rd line as if it were a recipe. A boy under the window hums without knowing he does. Someone adds a soft harmony that wobbles once and then holds like a hand finding a rail in the dark. At a well near the goldsmith's, the procession halts. The friar lifts the bell once. The sound settles into the stone rim where generations have braked the rope with their feet. He speaks of water and of mouths that cannot come this far. The sister tilts a small flask. A single drop of oil spreads on the well's skin and makes a brief, perfect coin. For those who cannot swallow. The oil vanishes to the side. The line moves on. Doubt walks with them. You can smell it the way you smell the change before rain. Metal, distance, a little pride. It wears different clothes on different people. The physician at the corner, who has already argued for smoke and against baths, watches the banner pass and thinks, Air, not angels. But he tips his head because he sees the ward in the blue cloth, and because humility is easier to wear outside a lecture hall. A baker sets down his peel and makes a sign of the cross halfway, finishing it as a scratch behind his ear, hoping no one saw the indecision. A notary holds a folded packet, addressed to a house on Via del Porrione, and tells himself he will deliver it after none when the sun is kinder. Then he steps into the line for 3 turns, because papers like to be written in a world that still contains song. When the procession reaches the open of the Campo, the city shows its other devotions. A pair of flagellants, stranieri by their accent, step from under an arch, bare from the waist and blue with cold, cords at their necks, as if they had captured themselves. They sing a different chant with a beat that expects pain to answer. News said such companies have walked north from Perugia and south from Lucca, preaching repentance with backs and blood. Some cities welcome them, some are wary. Siena has not decided. The constable lifts a hand, neither blessing nor threat. The friar turns his banner a little, widening the space like a careful host who sets table far apart. The strangers take the hint and veer toward the road to Porta Romana, their voices shedding syllables behind them like husks. The Lauda takes a breath and continues. A rumor moves faster than they do. A letter from Avignon bound with a red silk thread says the Holy Father grants indulgence to those who confess and cannot find a priest, and that the dying may have absolution from any who will hear them and love them and tell the truth. Whether the wording is exact, no one can swear. Parchment travels with ears attached, but the idea itself puts weight in hands that thought they had none. An old woman comes down 2 steps from her door and says to her granddaughter, "Listen how they say we," and the girl nods, which is to say she will remember. The centerpiece comes not in the Campo, but in a narrower street where smell concentrates. Garlic, vinegar, thawing wool. The procession meets a threshold blacked at the edges with smoke against bad air. A man stands in the shadow and says he will not come out. He is not proud, only frightened of collapsing where all can see. The friar nods and stops. He lifts the banner so gold touches brick above the door and holds it there as if telling the house it is also a room in the hospital. The Lauda drops to a humming that people can carry on less breath. The sister holds the bell between finger and thumb, silent, as if pinched. The constable marks time with his heel, 1-2, a habit of a man who once loved the drum at festivals and now uses it to govern himself. From inside the house, a voice tries to shape a confession and fails. The words tangle. The friar does not instruct. He tells the man to speak as if he were telling a friend what must be said before the mule sets out at dawn. "Name what you owe," he says softly, "and what you forgive." The man manages both. A woman's voice in the dark adds a debt that is not coin. The friar gives back what he can. Absolution, measured and unornamented, the kind that does not fight the wall. The sister sets the bell down at her feet and takes a breath that is almost a sob and turns it, with practice, into a swallow. The banner trembles once and steadies. They move again. In windows, hands appear, then retreat. A child holds up a sprig of rue like a tiny pennant. A man on a stool folds his hat against his chest and keeps it there, not because anyone sees, but because he prefers the shape of himself in that posture. The Lauda's last verse uses a word for shelter that Siena learned long before this year, riparo, the practical shadow a wall gives to bodies. The banner's blue reads that word in gold and returns it to the mouths that sang it. By Vespers, the circle has thinned to what it was at start. Friar, porter, sister, bell. The constable has gone back to his post. He writes 3 lines in his little book and draws 1 careful cross. The yard receives the banner again. The brackets on the ward wall accept the pole's weight with the familiarity of a tool well used. Doubt stays. It sits on a bench by the hospital stair and counts. How many who saw the gold will live? How many who didn't would have died anyway? How many words rise and do not change air at all? Then the kitchen door opens, and the smell of broth decides 2 arguments at once. The sister takes the bell up again, once, and the ward answers in spoons. Down the lane, the notary who stepped out of line earlier opens his case on a stool and smooths a sheet of parchment with hot breath. People come, one by one, to summon words about houses and debts and children and forgiveness written as coin. He dips his pen, pauses, the Lauda still clinging to his hand, and looks up because footsteps are approaching with a hurry that law seldom uses. A messenger from the palazzo lifts a sealed order, By nightfall, the weight of loaves will be set for the morrow, and witnesses for testaments will be accepted in smaller number if none others can be had. The notary nods, sands the page, and sets his hand to the first name. The bell, above, begins its slower count as if keeping time for ink. The notary sets his case on a stool as if setting a table. First the penknife, bone-handled, honed to a whisper to trim the quill. Then the pumice to smooth the parchment. Then the pounce, a little bag of powdered cuttlefish bone to dry the ink before it climbs where it shouldn't. He breathes on the page, not for ceremony, but to know the room. The breath comes back vinegar and tallow and winter. Behind him, the lane talks and taps, ladle to keg, heel to step, bell to air. You sit with the others beneath the shallow arch on Via del Porione, where notaries have long wed speech to law. Today the line is shorter in bodies and longer in hours. A clerk reads out the new order from the palazzo. In necessity, fewer witnesses will suffice. The seal of the city stands in for hands that cannot come. The words are neat, sober, meant to sound like guidance rather than loss. People nod as if taught a new prayer. Name, the notary says, and the woman answers with two, her own and the dead ones she once shared. He writes them with the same care he uses for merchants' letters, because grief deserves spelled names as much as trade does. Parish, San Martino. Goods, she hesitates as if taking inventory might break what it counts. A chest with iron bands, a red cloak, a mattress of wool, 2 pewter plates, 3 hens if they live, a rosary. He writes each, leaving space as though more might arrive while ink dries. Debts? Another pause. We owe 4 soldi to the baker, and Goro the cooper owes my husband 2 for the hoop he never fetched. The notary marks both lines with a small symbol he alone understands, the sign that promises he will try to lift a little of one with the weight of the other. Wills have their grammar, older than fear, and now busier. They begin with God and end with ground. The notary's cadence is part prayer, part ledger. Item, to Santa Maria della Scala for the care of the poor, 1 loaf each week until this purse is finished. The purse on the bench knows how close it is to done. The notary does not look at it while he writes. Item, to the Opera del Duomo, the works of the cathedral, 2 denarii to keep the lamps. Item, to the confraternity, a small sum toward dowries for poor girls. Item, if the child in my belly lives, a blanket from the chest. If it does not, the blanket to the neighbor's daughter. These are sentences that know how to turn, even when the world slows. The witnesses lean in the way men do who want to be useful without catching the eye of fate. A neighbor with flour on his sleeve. A barber who has promised not to open veins in the fevered, unless a physician swears he will answer for it. A clerk with ink on his thumb. The notary recites the clause that forgives formalities, because of the present necessity and the want of men, then sets the pen to the place for marks. The widow cannot write. He guides her hand through the cross. His penknife lifts a crack of wax to soften it. The seal, Wolf and Twins, the city's old story, kisses the red. The page takes it like a promise and a witness both. Next, a small man with a careful beard and a purse that sounds like a handful of pebbles when he moves. He names himself partner in a concern that traded cloth to Perugia and brought back alum and news. His partner lies at the hospital, breath shallow, mind sharp enough to ask for unwinding. The notary opens a second book, the one for broken ledgers, and writes, Commenda dissolved by necessity. He lists bolts of cloth stored in a cousin's loft, sums owed by a dyer near Porta Ovile, a debt long hoped for from a tavern whose sign is a red fox. These are words that usually wear patience. Now they wear haste. On the margin, the notary adds a symbol for seek mercy before law, because pursuit has grown crueler than forgiveness. The city's money, once confident as a marriage contract, has learned to stammer. Florins still circle through hands with the quiet authority of gold stamped with the lily of Florence. Sienese silver still rings on the table. Denarii still count by 10s into soldi and by 20s into lire. But the rhythm stumbles. Letters of exchange used to move like swallows between towns. Now seals arrive late, thread frayed, news old enough to be rumor. The notary copies one into his register anyway. Pay to Luca Tolomei by order of his factor, such and such, because paper believes tomorrow exists until proved otherwise. From the mercanzia, a clerk hurries with a bundle of folded sheets under his arm. He asks for formulae that can carry more name with less body. Nuncupative wills, spoken in front of those who can hear. codicils to Old Testaments that never imagined this year, receipts for alms given not to a hand, but to a threshold. The notary shares phrases the way a baker shares leaven, each one a starter to make something rise where it would otherwise fail. He pauses before one line and lowers his voice. For reconciling enemies who cannot be brought to meet, he murmurs, I have a wording that leaves room for grace. The clerk nods and takes it like bread. A banker's boy arrives from a palazzo whose windows used to outweigh neighbors' doors. He carries an account book thick as a torso, the edges thumb black, the leather rubbed white where worry's finger has learned the corner. The master has asked the notary to witness that certain bonds cannot be collected because the men who signed them can no longer answer. The boy waits while pages are counted, lines pricked, balances written down like gravestones. In the courtyard outside, someone coughs. The boy stiffens as if he has been named. The notary gives him the page and a brief look that says wordlessly that carrying gravity is work and he is doing it. By mid-afternoon, the line at the arch is a cross-section of the city, a painter with bowls still under his nail, setting small bequests for his apprentices, a pebble-voiced woman from the washerwomen's lane who wants 3 lines to guarantee her daughter's marriage portion if she's taken before harvest, a foreigner with the soft R's of Lombardy seeking to send coin north by a messenger who knows which roads ask less of lungs. The notary writes the same care into all, and in the margin of the Lombard's letter adds a warning in small script, avoid the inn at the bridge, fever there. The centerpiece of the day comes when a man in a mason's cap stands before the stool and removes it with the deliberation of one who will not be hurried by any other hand. His palm shows lime in the lines. For the opera, he says, meaning the cathedral works. I cannot go on with the others. My mate lies at Santa Maria. My eldest is the only hand left for the cart. He sets a small purse down, opens it, counts 4 denarii on the wood, pushes them back to himself, then one across to the notary. For the lamp, he says, so the Madonna's face is not left in dark when the wind forgets itself. The notary records the gift for the lamp over the north aisle and writes the man's name as if carving it. When the mason asks that his tools go to his nephew, if he fails to return from the field tomorrow, the notary adds a line about chisels and a mallet, and the mason signs with a mark like a small hammer. Outside, the bell moves the hour along like a cautious shepherd. The notary sands a page. The grit drinks the wetness and gives it back as a dry whisper. He ties a ribbon around a bundle, 3 wills, 2 codicils, a notice of dissolution, then heats a bit of wax with a candle stub and bites it with his stamp. He has learned to send a second copy to the hospital porter, who keeps a chest against the day when families ask what was said and no one remembers who heard it. By evening, the light has gone gray in the lane. The notary closes the case, sets the penknife across the clasp like a brace, and rubs the ink from his thumb with a scrap of linen already black with other days. He lifts his bag, hears the purse of pebbles again, the sound of coin turned to promises, and steps into the small crowd moving toward the ridge. Up at the Duomo, the opera's yard waits with its own arithmetic. Pulleys hang like idle moons. A block of marble sits on a sledge where hands left it, white as a winter tooth in dusk. A rope creaks once in wind and then stills, as if the stone were listening for orders that no longer come. The mason with lime in his palm pauses at the threshold, hat in hand, and looks toward the half-built arch that wanted to become sky. Somewhere beneath, a watchman shifts his weight and a lantern opens like a coin. The bell in the Torre del Mangia draws breath, then lowers its voice for night, and a shape moves on the scaffolding that could be a man or only a tarpaulin remembering a gust. Evening gathers on the cathedral ridge, and the half-born giant, the Duomo Nuovo, holds its breath like a sentence cut off mid-word. The scaffolds wear ropes that no hands are pulling. The pulleys, once bright with motion, hang slack as moons tied to wood. Below, the old church, Siena's black and white body of faith, keeps its accustomed shape, nave finished, lamps trimmed. Above and to the north, the dream of tripling the space stands in ribs and arches, a skeleton waiting on flesh that will not come. You climb the opera yard where carts once creaked all day with blocks from quarries and lime from kilns. Boots remind the boards of work. Toe, heel, toe, heel. A watchman steps from a lean-to and lifts his lantern, the light a buttery coin that buys a little order from the dark. He recognizes your face not by name, but by the shared grammar of citizens who have been naming the same streets all their lives. Mind the plank, he says, pointing at a board that has learned to flex too much. He folds his cloak tight over his chest when wind comes from the campo and brings with it the slow bell. The Opera del Duomo, those who plan and pay and measure, once spoke here as if speaking could turn marble to obedience. Masters of stone set out schemes, scribes copied contracts, carters cursed weather, and quarrymen boasted of veins they had found that ran true without fissure. In 1339, the city made a promise with itself, larger, higher, brighter, so Siena's house of God would match its own confidence. For years, cranes walked their circles, masons set one ashlar on another, and the rising wall was a calendar no one had to read. Then the year turned to 1348, and the bell changed its count, and the crane's path became a story told about yesterday. Tools wait where hands left them. A mallet with its head wrapped in rawhide, a tooth chisel that knows the sound of Carrara and of local stone, an iron pinch dog used to hold blocks friendly while mortar cures. Ropes, turned smooth by palms, still remember their owners' names. A plumb bob hangs and points to earth with the old certainty that keeps walls honest. The chalk lines on a pier's face make a diagram of intention that now looks like tenderness. The wind erases and rewrites it each day. The watchman walks you under an arch that wants to believe it is eternal. His lantern sweeps a shallow crack that spiders from the springing toward the haunch. Small, he says, and old. He explains the way men do who have learned to live with facts and with the rumors facts invite. Some say the foundations under the new nave were asked to lift more than the subsoil will bear, that clay shifts where marble dreams. Others say haste taught the mortar bad habits. Still others that when hands and eyes thinned this spring, care thinned with them. Years later, examiners will argue over causes with a certainty paper can afford. Tonight, the watchman taps the pier with his knuckle and listens. The stone answers like a chest, hollow here, solid there, music a mason understands. Work has not stopped everywhere at once. A pair of boys from the yard carry buckets of sand to cover a place where rain kept the ground too honest. A mason sits on a low stool sharpening his chisel with the patience of a man who knows he may not need it tomorrow, but refuses to let iron forget its trade. He shows you his hands, white in the lines with yesterday's lime, and laughs once without cheer. We always thought the Madonna wanted a bigger house, he says, and now it seems she prefers a wiser one. A clerk from the opera appears with a ledger under his cloak, ink blackened to winter speed. He nods at the watchman and finds a dry corner to set the book, weighing the page with a chisel so wind cannot turn it. He has brought orders from the 9. Money set aside for marble will be loaned to bread and to the hospital's kitchen until feast days return to their natural speech. He writes the names of men who will be paid a half-week's wage to carry lime to pits, another half to keep watch against theft from the stores. Better honest idleness, he writes, quoting someone wiser than himself, than dishonest work. His quill scratches. The lantern halos the words with yellow that will be brown by morning. Under a scaffold bay, an image has been chalked at human height, a simple Madonna, a child tucked against her like a secret you're allowed to keep. It is not a masterpiece. It is a worker's mark, drawn to keep courage from sliding off the day. Beside it, someone has written a small prayer for a friend in the ward. The chalk has blurred where dew comes at dawn. You read the names anyway. The watchman touches the child's face with a forefinger and wipes the dust on his cloak, as if sharing the blessing with the fabric. The centerpiece of the hour arrives when a cart comes up the slope with a load that would have meant progress last winter. A block veined like a winter sky. The carter climbs down, looks at the skeleton of the new nave, and asks where to set his stone. The mason on the stool stands, glances at the clerk, and then at the watchman. No order has come to reject what was already on the road when the city changed its use of coin. The clerk squares his shoulders and points to a level patch under a tarpaulin. Lay it there, he says, above ground, covered, noted. The carter nods. The mule shakes its harness. The crane that might have sung lifts no syllable. The stone comes off as if gravity were a favor. The rollers creak, the pry bar bites, and the block settles with a sigh that is more heat than sound. The mason and the carter look at each other the way two men look when they have just done something that isn't work and yet took strength. The clerk writes another line. Stone delivered, not set. He adds the quarry mark and the date lest the city forget which promise waits under the tarp. He warms his hands over the lantern, then closes the ledger so dew cannot argue with ink. The watchman takes a turn about the yard, counting ropes, testing knots, tightening a tie where a clever wind undid it. He points out the crane's tread where men once walked in a wheel, to lift the world a finger's breadth at a time. We have our own parables, he says, smiling almost. Walk steady in a circle and something rises. From the ridge you can see the Campo shelled like a scallop, holding its pearl of brick. A handful of people crosses it without speaking. The bell's slow measure follows them like a second shadow. In the lane below, a notary with his case hurries toward a house where a man has found breath enough to dictate forgiveness. Farther off, a small procession rounds the hospital yard, blue banner held steady against wind that wants to turn it. Siena, like a panel painting, contains gold and dark in the same frame. Both are true. You stand at the unfinished wall, where the city once planned to open a door into air. The courses stop, clean cut, as if a hand had lifted and would return. An arch begins, and then remembers it has other duties. The watchman rests the lantern on a sill that will never admit light from inside to out. They say, he offers, that we will use this as a terrace to see the town, a place to teach our children how big a dream can be and how big a city must be to carry it. Whether that becomes truth or rumor is a choice the years have not made. Wind comes again, bringing the taste of lime from the slope and the faint sweetness of tallow from the hospital lamps. The mason picks up his tool, runs his thumb along the edge, and slips it back in his roll. The clerk ties the ledger with ribbon and tucks it inside his cloak as if warming a bird. The watchman tips his lantern so the flame leans and rights itself, a tiny rehearsal for larger steadiness. Then something moves above, along the scaffolding where cloth flapped earlier like a ghost. A shape steps from shadow to light. A man, not a tarp. Pale as the marble under the tarp, one hand on a rope, the other at his breast as if steadying a thought. He shouldn't be there at this hour. The watchman lifts the lantern, and the shape calls down, not loud, not yet, your name or a name close to it, as if stone itself had learned a voice. The man on the scaffold is only a watch lad, pale from sitting too many hours above the empty yard. He shades his face with his palm and calls again, not your name, but rider. The word angles down the stone like a thrown nail. The watchman lifts his lantern. Below, on the road that climbs from Porta Romana, a small knot of movement shakes itself free of dusk. Two mounted men, mud to the girths, a third on a mule with panniers that look like tired hearts. The bell keeps its slow law, but hooves claim a quicker time, a rhythm the city remembers from better errands. By the gate, torches lift, cautious suns in wind. Siena's guards have learned a new choreography. 3 paces back from any traveler, questions asked sideways to spare breath. A table set with a bowl of water cut with vinegar and a cloth no one argues about anymore. One rider raises a hand in the sign that asks for parley and not entry. His cloak is salted white where sweat met dust and dried. The mule's ears swivel like small, worried weathercocks. You follow the watchman down the opera slope to the square of stone between the gate towers, where the road's grammar pauses to change from countryside to city. Calm sits there first, an old habit, the clerk's neat board, the seal with its wolf, the predictable questions. Then tension climbs in with the rider's steaming sides. From Ascano, the first says, voice cracked on his own name. From the Val d'Arbia, and from beyond Monte Aperti, adds the second, as if the old battlefield still carries weight in sentences. They bring letters wrapped in oiled cloth against weather, and worse. One from a miller near Taverne d'Arbia about grain standing too long. One from the commune of Buonconvento asking if the cart of beans promised to Siena last month will still be welcomed if the driver keeps his hood up and speaks to no one. One from a Franciscan house on the Via Francigena, the Pilgrim Road, saying beds are empty, bowls are ready, and fear eats as steadily as hunger. The guard sets the letters to one side as a friar taught him. New parchment rests, old parchment opens. The clerk breaks seals with the back of his knife, not to bruise more than necessary. The words themselves smell of lamp smoke and wool, of rooms lit on purpose. Reports become a kind of weather. The Maremma Road is passable if you leave before dawn. The ford at Isola d'Arbia walks kinder to carts when you follow the left braid. The bridge at Ponte Atressa is sound, but watched by men who will not let strangers pass at night. Wolves have been heard near the olive groves. That old rumor returns whenever human feet thin, and a shepherd has counted fewer hands than sheep. A woman in the Contado writes on the margin of her husband's stiff hand, "The beans want picking all at once. We are only 2. From Pisa, a shorter note rides farther. The port keeps ships out beyond easy hail. Skiffs nose bales ashore in the dusk like guilty thoughts. Salt is dear. A Pisan factor, who used to write scorn with elegance, now copies in a decent hand that fear is a currency and buys poor things. From Florence, a man named Matteo sends lines that dampen as he reads them aloud to himself at his desk before copying. News of Bell and beer and the arithmetic Siena already knows. He adds a sober plea. Do not send messengers for rumor. Send only for bread. The mule's panniers carry smaller news that still matters. Packets of alum wrapped in waxed paper for a dyer who refuses to let color go common. 2 cones of sugar for the hospital pharmacy to sweeten the mouths of those who can swallow. Wild fennel seeds in a twist of cloth from a widow who remembers what steadiness tastes like when you chew. The guard notes them in a column he never had to draw before, the one for things that are not necessity and yet are. Within the guardroom, where the stone keeps its cool like a virtue, the riders drink watered wine and rub their hands as if trying to knead sensation back into their fingers. A map sits on the table, a simple piece of parchment pricked and inked with the roads like veins. The clerk weighs it at the corners with river stones and sets pebbles where messengers report trouble. Monteroni, labor thin. Quinciano, a baker lost, oven cold. Roddy, a boy sent with word that the old well's rope broke, and the new rope bites hands as if it were angry at being needed. These are not chronicles meant for binding. They are the city's palm reading its own lines. The centerpiece arrives with a 4th figure, on foot, from the darkness along the ditch rather than the road. He carries a bundle on his back, roped tight, sacks of hard beans and a cheese wrapped in damp cloth, a cargo that smells like small courage. His hood is up. He stops outside the torch's full circle. From Buonconvento's edge, he says. He will not cross the line of charcoal the captain drew at the gate. He asks if Siena will take the beans and send back, with the empty sacks, a cord and pins, because we have our dead as well, he says without drama, and linen is money. The guard nods, opens the palm of the city the way a hand opens to receive a child, and gestures to a spot where the bundle can be set. The man steps forward like a shy dog, lays down the weight with the care a mason lays a block, and steps back. No one moves until he has taken another stride into his own air. Letters answered become their own procession. The clerk drafts short replies on the table edge, borrowing words from orders given in the palazzo this morning and bending them to the road. To the miller, send grain in small carts by dawn. The hospital in the city will take it into their yard and air it before milling. To Buonconvento, the beans are welcome. The driver may keep his hood. A cord and pins will return with the mule before noon. To the Franciscan house, bread at the gate at prime, broth at the hospital. If you send only 2, no procession, a prayer spoken at the threshold will count. He sands the words. The friar touches the page with a look as if blessing were a kind of punctuation. At the gate's lip, a farmer from the Montone slope waits with his hat 2-handed against his chest. His base carries the surprise of someone who came to town for nails and a story, and found both changing shape. He says the peasants along his road will work if the city will send someone to measure wages with a fair hand and write it down, because memory fails when fear speaks. Siena has not yet reached the later arithmetic when wages rise like bread in a good oven. This is still the hour when hands are missing, not bargaining. Yet the clerk writes a name and a measure, and the watchman nods. At third light, a man from the opera yard, no longer needed for pulley and tread, will take a staff and ink and count work where grain stands ripe as a throat. A courier arrives from San Gimignano, towers like a handful of lifted fingers in his voice, even before he names the town. He says the road there breathes easier than the south. He says pilgrims have become letters, lighter to carry and less hungry. He carries one such letter, a line from a tanner's cousin to a Sienese tanner named Agnolo, word that will one day be remembered in a sentence no city should have to keep. I buried my children with my own hands. The guard does not read that history. He only sees a name and a seal and sets it in the basket for delivery at dawn. Night pushes fully against the gate. Torches hiss like snakes caught in rain. The riders shift, grateful and reluctant. The clerk makes the sign he keeps for departures, a small cross not traced on skin, but turned in the air at shoulder height, a way of asking the road to remember its manners. The guard hands back letters bound with stronger thread. The mule tosses its head once, as if grammar were an irritant and movement the sentence it prefers. Before the gate can close, hoofbeats drum from the north. A breath later, a voice hoarse with cold and distance. From the Arbia bridge, the little one near Quinciano, half its planks are gone, A bean cart, yours, stands on the near bank waiting for daylight and hands. If Siena wants the load before heat and fear take it, men with ropes must be sent by first light, and they must work in pairs, with the new knots the friar taught to undo fast if a plank slips. The watchman looks to the clerk to the guard. A decision ties itself in 3 nods. The guard chalks a sign on the stone where morning eyes will see it, a square for rope, a circle for men, a line for dawn. Above, the lad on the scaffold lifts his lantern, tiny moon on a dead crane, and swings it twice toward the campo, a trick for sending news across dark roofs. Down the slope, in the hospital yard, a bar scrapes in its brackets. A pot is set for broth to carry with the ropes. A sister counts towels without bothering herself whether anyone has named them requisition. The gate swings inward. The bell lifts weight and lets it fall with grave patience. Siena turns to the few hours of night it will allow itself. Before it sleeps, the city rehearses, in its head, the road to Quinciano, out at Prime, across the low ground, left at the stone where vines climb it like handwriting, right at the olive that leans as if listening. The last torch gutters, and the watch lad on the scaffold calls down, softer this time, "Riders, at dawn," and the dark agrees to keep the place. Dawn lifts like a lid. You shoulder the coil of rope the friar taught you to knot, the one that bites fast and releases faster, and step through Porta Romana into air that smells of wet earth and wood smoke, banking itself for later. 2 men from the opera yard walk ahead with poles across their shoulders. Behind, the hospital porter balances a jar of broth in a wicker cradle slung from his elbow, because work travels better when it tastes of kitchen. The road takes its old shape underfoot, ruts hardened by cartwheels, a seam of frost under grass, the pale thread of the Via Francigena running past vine and olive, monastery and mill, toward towns whose bells make other arithmetics. The calm of first light has weight. You hear the creak's quiet nerve, the leather creak of harness on a mule still dreaming, a cock crow that mistakes duty for song. Where the hill eases, a wayside tabernacle keeps its little fresco, the Virgin's robe faded to a memory of blue, a pilgrim's scallop scratched into plaster by someone who needed the world to remember he passed. A woman from a farmstead stands there, with a bundle of rushes for the floor. She nods and steps back so the ropes can go by without brushing her sleeve. She asks nothing, her eyes ask everything. Farther along, the road acquires rumors the way a cloak acquires burrs. A pair of Franciscans traveling light and dusty tell of a hospice beyond Buonconvento standing half empty because travelers turned into letters this month. The friars there boil water, then boil it again, and still can't persuade fear to drink. A charcoal burner from the Montagnola says wolves trotted in daylight along an olive terrace and nosed a broken fence. They smelled time, he shrugs, meaning that the herdsman didn't come when he should have. A peddler pushing a barrow full of pins and thread reports that in Lucca, a company of men whipped themselves up and down the streets until the city learned the cost of zeal on cold skin. In San Quirico, women sang from windows, and the song sounded like a basket lowered on a rope. These are not proofs. They are weather, and the road wears weather like a second surface. Someone breathes the word that harms quickest: poison. The story has walked from the north, stumbling and getting back up. Wells dusted by strangers, bread marked with a sign, Jews to blame, or lepers, or anyone the mouth can shape when fear wants a face. The friar lifts a hand and says what he has already said inside the walls. No decree can find truth in that. The only powders he's seen in Wells are sand from rain and grief from rumor. He adds, not softly, that God is not persuaded by cruelty. Siena has its sins, but it has no need of that one. The porter nods, the men grunt, and the road moves on. The story lags and goes looking for easier ears. Past Isola d'Arbia, the smell of water swells, clean and iron. At the low meadow, frost burns off like bad thought. You see the bridge before you see the cart, planks missing like teeth, the river showing its winter gums. On the near bank stands the bean cart, a small republic of sacks roped in a logic that will not survive a slip. A boy holds the mule's head, jaw set, eyes rehearsing panic and learning, by inches, not to speak it. He points with his chin at the bridge as if words would count against him. Calm sets the ground. Unload nothing yet. Test the sound parts. Set the rope. The men slide the poles under the remaining planks and feel the music of sound, timber against rot. The knot the friar taught, 2 turns, a tuck, a blessing disguised as a pull, goes around a stout willow on shore, and then around the cart's axle. You tie a second line to the mule's harness, not to pull, but to argue with gravity if it grows ambitious. The porter sets the broth in the lee of a rock and tucks a cloth over the mouth against dust, as if modesty will strengthen it. The river speaks in syllables under the span. The centerpiece becomes a sequence of steps no chronicle would bother to name, because they are too small and therefore exactly what saves the day. One man crosses with a pole, sets it, leans. The other eases the cart so the wheel rides the plank's center. You hold the rope and feel the lesson of tension. Not too much, not too little. The mule, bless him, learns the count before any man says it. 3, rest, 3, rest, and breathes when the men breathe. Mid-span, water bright as new steel shows through the missing boards. The cart's right wheel flirts with a gap, skids, rights. You hold. The willow speaks through the rope and tells you are not alone. On the far side, mud takes the wheel and pretends to be worse than it is. The men shove. You taste iron in your mouth, your own blood asks to attend. And it does. The cart makes land as if land had forgiven it. Someone laughs, the smallest bark, surprised at itself, and the boy lets go of the mule long enough to clap the animal's neck twice, then clamps his jaw again as if joy were an indiscretion. The porter ladles broth into a cup and holds it out with the courtesy he keeps for saints and stonecutters. The men drink and are careful about gratitude in front of the river. A pilgrim appears as if the hedge had decided to walk. Cloak patched, hat brim salted with old roads, staff in hand. A little lead badge of St. Thomas on his chest that caught light in other countries. He says he came from the south, where the houses are the color of bread, and that in Rome, priests hear confessions at doors and bless rooms by leaning in without crossing the threshold. He has a letter from Avignon, copy or cousin to the rumor already in Siena. Indulgence where no priest can come. Absolution from any who love and speak truth. Do you believe it? One man asks, rope still in his grip. The pilgrim answers with the wisdom the road teaches. I believe what makes us kinder, he says, and takes a swallow of broth that is mostly vinegar and hope. On the way back, the cart moves like a thought. The city forgot it needed and suddenly remembers. The sacks of beans shift with the measured clatter of good sense in a bag. The boy walks on the mule's shadow. The friar, who came after you with a second line of men, takes the rear, blessing not bodies but timbers and willows and the habit of tying knots so they free. He watches the ditches because sickness likes the low places where air lingers. He watches faces because rumor lives there. At the gate the guard has chalked a square and a circle and a line for dawn. He adds a cross to thank what did not break. The clerk writes Quinciano, passable if paired, and tucks the pebble on the map closer to Siena, as if geography could be persuaded by neatness. A woman steps from a doorway, touches one sack as if touching a child's head at night, and returns to her threshold with her lips moving over arithmetic, bean in pot, pot on fire, bowl in hand. Rumor arrives with you, too, spirits riding inward on the cart's wheels. A man at the well says he heard that Ambrogio, the painter of good government, is sick. Another swears he saw him at a window 3 days ago. Both may be true in the way city truths are true, moment to moment, as breath allows. A cobbler says the Pisans will close their gates entirely by week's end. A clerk says the letter from Pisa asked only that Siena keep hers open to grain before noon. The friar says that men with cords at their necks pass through and will keep to the road if Siena keeps its temper. No one argues, but everyone does. The cart climbs the hospital slope. The porter's bar thuds, lifts, the yard opens. Lime dust gusts where a shovel tapped earlier. The smell of broth climbs the stair like a hand offered. The sacks go to a corner under the arcade. The clerk counts within earshot of hunger, so arithmetic will be believed. You coil the rope and lay it on a ledge for its own rest. The willow's ghost is still in it. Evening leans. Across the campo, the palazzo's high room gathers its small suns of candle and tallow. Men set benches where law sits, and the fresco with dancing citizens stares without blinking. Someone has fetched a ladder and a soft brush. Someone else has brought water and vinegar and a cloth. They tilt the lantern, considering whether smoke should be wiped from the painted faces before the city forgets how they looked. The bell draws breath for the slow count. From the Duomo slope a voice calls your name, or a name close to it, the way Stone did last night. This time not from scaffolding, but from the hospital stair, half swallowed by wind. The call comes from the hospital stair, but your feet take you first to the palazzo, because the city has asked a different medicine tonight. In the Sala de Nove, Candles stand like small planets on iron stands, smokes braided thin against the vault. The room knows how to listen. Brick, plaster, pigment, because for a decade it has held a conversation between paint and law. On the long wall, Ambrogio Lorenzetti's allegory faces the Nine's table, with the calm of an older tutor, justice on her throne measuring out scales, concord drawing citizens together with a single rope, peace reclining with a soft belly and closed eyes, sword under her like a cat tamed by a warm bench. Across from them, the living city sits on benches, cloaks gathered, hands hidden in sleeves. A boy lifts a ladder, and the watchman from the opera steadies it with a palm that still remembers rope. No one tells him how to set his stance. That knowledge sits in the legs of men who protect. The clerk holds a soft brush wrapped in linen at its root, so bristles won't splay. The tool is for cobwebs and smoke, not for philosophy. He climbs to eye height with justice, and pauses because her gaze is not argument but measure, two pans weighing guilt and mercy until both learn their right size. He makes the sign on his chest without thinking and begins. Dust gives up easily. This is not the grease of kitchens, only the memory of lamps that burned long to make days longer. The brush whispers on plaster. A dry flake falls like a lost syllable. Down below, the friar stands with the banner folded, pole grounded like a pilgrim's staff. He has come to remember what the wall teaches his mouth on days when his own words tire. The sister from the hospital watches too, her hands folded into her sleeves for warmth and for the practice of keeping still. You let your eyes travel the city the painter made. Siena in paint dances a ring dance in the street. A bride in white goes between women who hold her veil like a sail. A mason builds a wall, his plumb bob honest. Two merchants cross a threshold with the compact ease of men who trust paper and each other. Outside, the countryside keeps its rhythm, sower's hand scattering seed, shepherd leaning on a staff, vineyard rows learning the year with patient elbows. Above them, security, Securitas, floats with her scroll, promising that those who live under good rule may go freely without fear. The promise is painted, not proclaimed. It looks down modestly, as if sure of its truth. Behind you, the Nine enter quietly, cloaks catching candle wind. They sit, not to meet, but to be met by what the wall says. One of them, the one who asked earlier that numbers not be sung when read, glances at Concord's rope running through citizens' hands, and then at the rope coil by the door that went out this morning to the broken bridge and came back with beans. The likeness is not lost on him. He writes a line on a tablet, "Keep knots teachable." A rumor has arrived before you that Ambrogio himself is ill, or was, or will be, depending on which mouth you ask and when you stand under its window. The Nine do not know, the friar does not, the sister does not. The wall, being a wall, says only what it has always said, which is enough. Cities are not kept by genius alone, but by civility practiced in thousands of small wrists and voices. If Ambrogio has fallen to this year, the city can still keep his grammar. The clerk steps down and the watchman steps up to the countryside panel. He brushes the sky first, because any man will begin with what he misses. The blue brightens by a thumb's width. He moves to the sower's field. Here, the paint holds a long lesson in short strokes, patience that looks like dust until it makes a harvest. He does not linger, but his hand slows a moment over the shepherd, who looks across a valley the way men look into a future they haven't yet decided to believe in. A painter arrives from the bottega, breath carrying glue and gold. He sets a small box on the bench, bowl, a tip, a leaf in its book. "Not for here," he says quickly. Fresco won't take leaf. But he cannot bear to walk anywhere without the possibility of light in a pocket. He tilts his head at peace, soft, secular, honest as sleep, and whispers, not to the men, but to the paint, "We are trying." He means the banner carried along the loggia, the faces he laid this morning, under a mantle on wood so they could stand under cloth by night and under oil by day. The wall accepts the confession without reply. The centerpiece of the hour rises along the third wall where another city lives, the allegory of bad government, seldom visited at dusk because men prefer hope when they can afford it. Tonight someone lights 2 candles near it anyway. Tyrannus sits heavy, eyes empty, vices orbiting him like tame hawks. Justice lies bound. Fear, Timor, holds a scroll that promises punishment where love should have worked. In the painted street, a man is murdered and no one stops. Fields burn under a darkened sky. The Nine do not turn away. One of them says, almost to himself, "Remember, this is also us, when we forget our manners." The friar nods once. The sister lowers her eyes, not in shame, but as one does when she's learned a rule by heart and doesn't need to look to recite it. From the doorway, a breeze carries vinegar and rosemary up the stair. Santa Maria della Scala, breathing through the city's throat. The banner flickers. The gold at its hem speaks to the fresco's painted gold, and both agree to be quiet. The clerk returns to the good wall, and, with the soft brush, coaxes a little more light from Peace's robe. He does not touch her sword. That is business for mornings. He dusts the dancer's held hands and the bride's small face. The ring becomes a shade clearer, like a memory wiped with a clean cuff. A debate in low voices, whether to cover the frescoes with cloth while so many lamps burn day after day in the chamber, whether to move meetings to a darker room to spare smoke, whether to invite the city's painters to advise on care. The painter who brought the leaf lifts a palm. "Dry brush only," he says. "In damp, cloth makes mud." He glances at the sister, as if apologizing for contradicting her vinegar. She smiles because methods are not rival churches. They are tools for different rooms. The 9 assent. A boy is sent for more soft brushes. The constable at the door pockets a remark about feathers that would have made men laugh last year and would cost too much tonight. You stand close enough now to see Ambrogio's hand where he skated a hairline of white along an edge to make a seam of light. On a sleeve, a cheek, the hem of a mantle. The city in paint looks almost wet with truth. In the corner, written small enough to reward attention, a line addresses those who enter. The common good is the keeper of private goods. The words are Latin and learned, but the sense has taken up lodging in bread lines and rope knots and bowls of broth. The candles burn lower. The watchman descends. The brush is passed down like a relic, not for worship, but for use. The friar lifts the banner onto his shoulder. The 9 stand, and their benches scrape in a little chorus tempered by habit. For a breath, Siena holds both cities at once, the one where dancers turn and fields yield, and men keep their word, and the one where fear pitches law off its stool. The room is a hinge. The bell outside marks the pivot. Then the hospital porter appears in the doorway, hat in both hands, lime still in the nail beds. He does not step into the chamber. He knows where law lives. He says a name from the wards, plain, a mason's name, a father's name, and adds, he asks for a witness, and for someone to tell his eldest where the tools are tucked. The clerk closes the brush box. One of the 9 takes a candle. You take the other. They go down together. Friar, sister, clerk, one of the 9, you with the light, the banner's pole tapping each step like a staff. Behind you, Peace lies back on her cushions. Concord keeps her rope taut but friendly. Security floats with her scroll. Justice weighs. The door closes softly, leaving paint to keep watch. Outside, the Campo's brick cools. The tower draws the hour like a bow across a string, and from the lanes beyond, a sound gathers. Not bell this time, but a hammer striking, steady and alone, as if a house were teaching itself to be empty without breaking. Morning loosens itself from the stone with reluctance. In the square below the palazzo, men who used to gather for carts and quarrels gather now for work that did not exist last winter. Digging, carrying, lime, watching. A board nailed to a post lists measures the 9 approved last night by candle. Bread weight for the day, the hour carts may pass, and a line about wages that tries to sound like memory. As before, so now. The ink is neat. The city would like the past to remain a price. You stand at the edge where hiring always happens, even when the task is grief. A gravedigger with lime in his lines and a shovel across his shoulder waits with the dull self-possession of a man who knows what his back costs. A clerk reads out the posted sum. The gravedigger listens, then taps his shovel on the ground once, as if testing wood, and says a number that is more. He does not boast. He names breadth and distance, and the fact that there are fewer hands today than yesterday. A murmur answers, some in favor, some with the old reflex against disorder. The constable lifts his palm to the air between voices. The clerk looks toward the palazzo windows and says, carefully, "Half now, half when the pit is finished." The gravedigger nods. He and a second man shoulder their gear and go down the lane without looking back, as if looking might make price a sin. Elsewhere, the same arithmetic plays in different keys. At Fontebranda, the water runs out of the hill with its old honesty, and women wash with the new caution. distance measured by arm's length, gossip lowered to the timbre of thought. A fuller who once beat cloth on boards beats none today. He squints at a girl with the arm of a boy and asks if she can carry in his place for coin. She can. A mason who is paid to lift stone will move sacks of beans this week and lime the ground the next. A baker's boy who thought himself destined for crust and ash spends the afternoon at the hospital yard, learning to tie the knot that releases fast when planks slip. Work has changed clothes. Dignity keeps the habit of standing straight. The guilds, which taught the city to think in trades the way a choir thinks in parts, loosen their laces. The arte della lana dislikes it, but a carter's widow will hire men to haul bales in answer to no master but necessity. The goldsmith's quarter keeps its shutters halfway down in deference to damp. Yet, a bench opens for a woman with a hand steady enough to draw wire. Apprenticeship, which usually tastes of 10 long years, compresses like dough made with too much yeast. The city hopes it will not collapse when heat hits it. By mid-morning, the clerk from the mercanzia walks the lanes with a folded copy of the wages notice in his sleeve and the look of a man who would rather measure bowls than voices. He pauses at the hospital gate to confer with the porter. 2 men for pits, 1 man to carry buckets. A boy with honesty enough to count not only sacks, but days for a family who has lost count. He writes the names with his careful hand, and such neutrality that no one feels priced, only known. The centerpiece comes at a door with a newly fitted board. The house behind it is not poor, not rich, one of the city's many that made its way by habit. A cobbler's bench in the front room, a cot in the side chamber, a chest with iron bands that smells of wool and cedar. The people within have thinned to one, a girl of perhaps 14 and a boy of 8, with hair standing like a field in wind. A sister from the hospital stands in the street, with a loaf and 2 onions, and the skill of not looking as if she is taking an inventory with her eyes. With her is the notary, the case under his arm, a familiar kitchen, the penknife and pounce and short candle within, ordering the day like utensils set out before cooking. The sister asks first for names, not so she can weigh them, but so she can lift them. The girl gives them, plain, and adds that her father's tools are under the bench and that her mother kept the money in a twist of cloth in the jar under the stair. The notary nods at the living and writes for the dead, a line to appoint a guardian chosen from kin who has not left for the contado, a line to secure the bench and the awl and the good knife to the boy when he is old enough to use them safely, a line to promise bread from the confraternity for a month, a line to forgive the cobbler's debt for leather to a man who will read it and not become smaller. The sister adds a line of her own, spoken rather than written. Come to the hospital yard at none. Broth for 2, no questions. The girl says thank you like a command she has learned to obey. A hammer sounds down the lane, 3 careful blows, and you see another door being sealed with a board and a dab of wax under the city stamp. Not to steal, not to punish, to keep a room from turning wild when no foot crosses it. A cat stands in a window with the proprietary calm of an animal that believes in ownership only when hungry. A neighbor pours ash across the threshold and sweeps it into the gutter with old pride. Clean and proper is a habit that survives like mint in a courtyard, needing little soil to live. By afternoon, the house list grows heavy in the clerk's pocket. He marks the doors where kin can claim, the doors where no one answers, and the city must choose between charity and custody, the doors where tools should be gathered before damp and thieves take them. The confraternity men, who know the city by stares and smells, divide the streets between them and walk with cords and tags. They do not break locks. They tie keys to boards and hang them at eye level, each labeled with a parish and a name. It looks like a market for absence, and yet it keeps these rooms citizens instead of empty places. Rents begin to slip and tangle like a rope stored wet. A landlord leans in a doorway talking to himself. He has never liked numbers that yield to pity, and today they all do. The notary's pen finds a grammar for mercy. In consideration of the present necessity, the rent for the current quarter is forgiven, and the tenant shall keep the hearthstones swept and the shutters in repair. The landlord signs with a hand that surprised itself into decency. In the campo, men scuff their heels where the palio would gallop in summers with flags like birds. A voice whispers about fines for those who take higher wages than the notice says. Another says fines require men to collect them, and men prefer breadlines to quarrels. Someone mutters that in England, name delivered with a shrug toward distance, lords have already written laws to fix pay. The friar says softly that laws try to remember a past that cannot come when the present asks louder. No one answers because the bell has gathered itself, and talk prefers not to compete. Evening returns with the sound of keys touching boards and boys carrying onions in both hands, so none roll into gutters. You pass a lane where ivy has learned to read sunlight. It climbs in the pattern of windows. Behind one, a chair has been set neatly, legs aligned with the lines in the tile, as if the house refused to be disheveled by absence. Beside it lies a pair of shoes with the leather cleaned and a strap mended. Work a cobbler must have done on the last day before the bell learned this count. The sight holds you the way a saint's relic holds the faithful, small, ordinary, exact. From the hospital yard, a cart goes out with two men and shovels. From the opera, a boy goes down with a list of wages to read at the well. From the palazzo, a clerk descends with a second notice that eases the need for witnesses again because ears have become scarce. In the bottega, the master lays a thin line of white along a mantle's edge, so cloth will remember how to catch light. Then he turns to his apprentice and says, "Tomorrow we paint hands." The night begins to make its shape. Boards on doors, wages folded into purses, onions hung in 2s and 3s from nails. A hammer strikes somewhere in rhythm with thought. Tap, pause, and the air declares itself cold again. Up the cathedral slope, the unfinished wall looks over the city like a book held open to a page on patience. Down by the hospital, a child cries, a thin, insistent wire, and everyone within earshot listens not to the fear it threads, but to the proof that lungs still learn their work. Then, from the road below Porta Romana, a sound rises that is not bell and not cart. The call of a stranger asking in a cracked voice for the porter, saying he has news from the south, and a bundle not of beans but of names. The porter meets the stranger at the charcoal line outside the gate. Lanterns make halos on the damp. Vinegar stings like a reprimand. The man's bundle is neither beans nor cloth, but papers tied with cord and steadied by a plain board. Names from the south, he says, written by a friar with a careful hand in Buonconvento, Torrenieri, San Quirico, then pass north like a pail along a line of wells. Not all are dead, he adds quickly, because hope walks with him even if it limps. Some are sick, some are only missing, and the porter nods and keeps the distance the city has taught him, the art of compassion measured by paces. Calm begins with the table under the arch. Wax stub, sand, a dish for water, cut with vinegar, a clean cloth. The clerk arrives with sleeves pushed and silence ready. He unties the cord, lays the board flat, and spreads the pages as if airing linens. Each sheet smells faintly of smoke and sheep fat, homes folded into paper. He orients them by parish and road, those nearest the Maremma, those along the Pilgrim Way, those from the smaller farmsteads that never expected to teach the city their names. Tension climbs in on feet and breath. A woman from Porta Tufi whispers a surname through the bars and waits with hands in sleeves. A boy whose ears stick out like parentheses says he was sent to fetch any news, then blurts a specific name as if it had burst from him against orders. A man with lime in the lines of his hands stands back, as if ashamed to ask for himself when others might have worse to learn. The clerk reads in the voice he reserves for measurements. Maddalena, wife to Pietro the miller, ill but steady. Serafino, dyer's lad, seen last at Ponte d'Arbia with a cart. Maestra Fiore, midwife, dead, confessed by her own niece. The words draw shapes in the air. People catch at them, like cloth thrown to the drowning. A sister from Santa Maria della Scala has come down with a basket and a habit of patience. When the clerk reads a name the air cannot carry, she sets a small stone on the board beside the line and says, "We will find the ear that needs this." The porter keeps a second tally, the houses to be told in the morning, the doors where bread must be left with the news. He writes nothing harsh. Even dead, he says with a bend of the head that gives the word a room. The centerpiece of the hour is a small procession with no pole, no banner, only a folded page and 2 lights. You go with the sister, through lanes the city knows by foot, more than by map. Doors hold their boards, the way ribs hold breath. At each, she calls softly, not the name first, but the trade. The spinner's house, the mason's widow, the baker's mother. The city answers by type, because names fail when throats do. Where no one comes, she pushes a scrap under the sill. News at dawn, bread. Where someone opens, she begins with the gentler truth if she has one. Seen on the road, steady at none, asleep when we left, and then, if she must, the other. Grief appears in different clothes, anger buttoned tight, collapse folded neat, a practical nod that will become weeping after the door closes. The sister accepts all costumes. She knows sorrow is a master of disguise. Inside one door, you are asked to step in, not to the sick room, only to the hearth. The family has divided the night into pieces because whole nights cannot be borne. One watches the pot, one wipes the brow, one walks the small room, counting 10 paces and back. A metronome to keep thought from collapsing. A girl with sleep in her hair reads out loud. Not a saint's life, but a list. The bread weight posted at the compo. The hour carts may pass. The rule about witnesses eased again. Her voice makes a low scaffolding the room can lean on. The mother sleeps sitting up, the way a soldier sleeps in armor. When the fevered one stirs, the watcher speaks of onions and the price of fennel, and the patient smiles without waking because the voice has replaced pain with arithmetic. The sister kneels to the hearth and shows the boy how to turn the pot without uncovering it, how to keep heat polite. She ties a rag around a spoon so a hand won't remember it is hot. She sets a cup near the bed and says, "For your mouth when you wake, and for saying yes under it when you cannot say yes with words." There is a prayer tucked into the instruction. It does not weigh the cup down. Before she leaves, she looks at the door latch and lifts it twice, the old sign to a passerby that a house welcomes help if it comes with steady hands. At the hospital, survival is also divided into hours. The friar has written the day in chalk: prime, wash, terce, straw, sext, broth, nun, linen, vespers, prayers, short as breath. Between lines, everything unexpected. A physician, less certain each evening, now speaks more gently by day. He has abandoned cautery for poultice in one ward and reversed the order in another. He keeps a tally not of cures but of what seems to harm less. In the orphan court, an older girl teaches a younger how to hold a baby's feet so they do not kick the bowl. "Like this," she says, as if you were showing the child its own toes for the first time. The baby answers with a hiccup. The court laughs, a sound that startles the pigeons and makes the bell seem kinder for a stroke. News still arrives from outside. Wool shrunk because men boiled it too long in fear. A millstone cracked when a tired hand forgot the rhythm of grain. A lane in Florence where carts move only at night. A convent in Valdortia where nuns sing with doors open to the road so passers-by can borrow courage. The clerk copies what helps and leaves rumor to its own parish. He adds to the wages list 2 boys to learn knots and 1 girl with neat hands to fold the bandages just so. An art that feels like grammar when the day is frayed. Even in this year, Siena plots the next hour like a mason laying courses. The opera yard lends its boys to the gates. The painter's shop sends scraps of gold leaf to be crushed into oil for a sickroom icon. The baker measures loaves with a scale he sets in the window, so no one need ask twice. The mercanzia clerk writes a line forgiving interest until All Saints, then writes a second line in case All Saints must be asked to wait. Toward midnight, the bell changes its gait, the slow measure that taught the day now stepping downslope, as if it too must rest. The street listens. The wind has a taste of river and smoke and rosemary. Somewhere a cat leaps from sill to sill like a thought that refuses to be caught by grief. You carry the last 2 names to a door the sister could not face earlier, and the woman who opens meets the words with an uprightness that will be mistaken by those who weren't there for coldness. After you speak, she points to a stool. You sit. She says simply, "Wait a little." She goes to the back room and returns with 2 shirts, folded. "Carry these to the hospital," she says. He liked them soft. You take them the way one takes a relic. On the Duomo ridge, the unfinished wall keeps watch like a tooth in winter. A lantern moves along the opera yard once and then goes still. At the Palazzo, a last candle lifts the fresco's dancers before it gutters. Their joined hands look, in that flicker, like a rope again. Down in the wards, a sister counts 3 breaths and thinks of the road between them as a bridge men repaired with willow and knots. The hour ends, and another begins because hours, unlike men, do not tire. Somewhere an infant latches, and the sound is a kind of grammar. Somewhere a cart turns toward the gate with sacks of beans, and the mule remembers the count. Somewhere a notary sands a page and blows on it, and the grains lift like small, obedient stars. Somewhere the bell decides when to fall. And at the edge of hearing, beneath the lime and the vinegar and the smoke, another sound tries on the city's throat. The first swifts of the season, too early perhaps, or imagined. cutting the dark as if to write a different punctuation above Siena's roofs. Morning does not announce itself with trumpets. It returns by the small, stubborn mechanics of habit. A woman opens a shutter the width of her hand and leaves it there. A baker scratches yesterday's ash from the oven mouth and listens to the brick answer with its old heat. A sister in the ward counts 3 breaths and feels the third arrive a little easier. Siena does not declare survival, it rehearses it. The bell in the Torre del Mangia still keeps the city's grammar, but its count changes tone. Fewer slow strokes, more of the small notes that ask for measuring flour, for calling a clerk to table, for vespers spoken not as debt, but as daylight's neat fold. You hear space return between sounds like mortar between stones after a winter that tried to wash it out. The change is not triumph, it is a hinge quietly working. What endured? The answer begins with things that learned to be many before they were one. Bread, thinner than last spring, then thicker again. The line at the hospital gate, first need, then courtesy. The rope, first for bridges and carts, then for a banner's pole, then for tying keys to boards so empty houses stayed citizens instead of spoils. The city discovered that its strength lived in the repeated reach of ordinary hands. Santa Maria della Scala remains a map of such reach. The wards breathe without counting quite as hard. A midwife washes her hands and says a child's name with the authority of those who keep doors open to tomorrow. The friar rubs chalk from his sleeve and writes a shorter day on the board. Prime, wash, sext, broth, vespers, thanks. He is not naive, carts still come, and the lime does not sit unused. But he has laid aside 2 bowls against the hour when broth can be carried to a house instead of a hospital bed, because dignity sometimes prefers its own rafters. In the palazzo, the 9 meet without the look of men expecting to be out-argued by air. They keep the wages notice posted but scratch the date and write a later one. Work has learned new prices, and law must learn to hear them. They untie a ribbon around a chest and count coin that did not go to marble, then set it instead to grain and to repairs on bridges the winter wore thin. A constable offers a list of small mercies that cost little and buy much. Keep charcoal at the hospital gate for those who wait in cold. Let the vinegar seller use a bench under the loggia, so women need not bargain in the rain. Allow 1 boy from each parish to learn the knots the friar taught, so bridges will not depend on one man's belt. The 9 nod as if asked to bless a good sentence. Above their heads, Ambrogio's wall keeps its posture. Whether the painter lived to hear the later bell or lies among the city's arithmetic of lime, is one more truth the year may have swallowed, but his grammar stands. The dusting has left the dancer's hands clearer. Peace still leans with her sword asleep. Concord's rope looks more like a rope than ever. Sometimes a watchman, off duty, climbs the stairs alone to stand before the countryside panel and observe the day's weather in fields that do not exist. He leaves with enough balance in his pocket to carry him past the hospital slope without breaking stride. The opera yard reopens like a hand. The new nave's ribs still lift, interrupted. A thought too large for breath that year. Men do not pretend otherwise. A tarp keeps the waiting block from weather. A ledger remembers its quarry and day. A boy, returned from the gates where he learned to mark maps with pebbles, walks the tread of the crane wheel and tells a younger boy the parable. Walk steady in a circle, and something rises. They practice on empty, like a vow, until the day when wood and rope will take load again. Not to raise an ambition too wide for foundations, but to mend roofs and set lintels right in houses that waited. In the bottega, the master's banner has come home to be finished. The blue mantle dries deep as a well, the hem glints where the punch left its field of stars. Faces under the cloth were never portraits. Now, after the year's schooling, they look even more like everyone. The boy who coughed grinds azurite without coughing. He learned to breathe with the rest of the city. The master takes a fine brush and paints hands. Finally, as promised, palms open, not pleading, only ready. When he steps back, the panel regards the room with the calm of someone who has kept a lamp trimmed through a long storm. He signs nothing. Empty houses do not stay empty forever. The keys tied to boards have found pockets again. Doors that were waxed shut open under careful hands. A chair is moved 2 hands' breadth and becomes furniture instead of relic. Ivy that climbed windows because sunlight forgot them is cut back to give the glass its work. A cobbler's awl, saved under a bench by the sister's neat insistence, returns to a palm that fits it. A child turns the strap over her foot and grins because leather remembers feet without being asked. Loss remains, names recited at altars, corners that hold air too still. But usefulness returns first, as if the city's soul were a tool. Rumors keep traveling in their old shoes. Some say wages will rise and stay risen. Others say men will forget gratitude and argue like last year. Both will be right and wrong by turns. Letters from Pisa grow less tight in their script. Ships unload without so much theater. From Florence comes a story about a book being written there, a company of people telling tales to pass the time in a villa outside the pestilence. Siena's clerks, who would normally sniff at Florentine invention, copy the rumor into the margin and smile, because it sounds like life insisting on style, even in argument with death. What else endured were the city's instructions to itself, whispered so often they became habits. Boil the water if it makes you brave. Tie the knot that frees. Count the loaves where all can see. Write the names. Forgive the rent. Dust the wall. Carry the banner. Say the confession if you are the only ear. Leave the bowl. Come at prime. Go in pairs. Step light on the bridge. These are not laws. They are manners. And Siena learns that manners are a kind of wall when stone cannot be raised. By summer, fields beyond the gates remember how to look like fields. Wheat lifts its heads. Olives become grammar again instead of shadows. Wolves step back to their customary hours. The city will count the cost for years, of hands gone, of tools waiting, of rooms that learned silence too well. It will hold fast to some amendments. Fewer torches for mourning, more bread measured in public. Physicians quicker to say, "I do not know." Friars quicker to say, "I will help." And the hospital will keep a chest of shirts, washed thin by grief and kindness, because a woman once handed 2 to a messenger at midnight and changed the way the wards thought about linen. One morning, at last, the bell tries a different music. Not the fast-pealed joy of a wedding, not yet, but the bright middle that calls a market to honest bargaining. The note runs along the brick like light. In the campo, an old woman lowers a basket on a rope and laughs when a neighbor across answers with a loaf and a letter. In the palazzo, a clerk draws a line under a page of the wages notice and begins another with a steadier hand. On the Duomo ridge, the watchman shows a child the view from the unfinished wall and says, "This is how far a dream can lift you and where prudence asks you to stand." Even the Swifts keep their appointment. They stitch the sky with their fast signatures, writing a season across roofs that learned, this year, how to read. One cuts low over the hospital loggia. The sister looks up and mistakes the flick of its wing for a blessing, and does not correct herself. The banner's gold answers with a quiet that reads as assent. And when the bell pauses between one count and the next, holding every ear in the city for a clean heartbeat, you hear it, the space where another sound could fit. Hammer, laugh, oar on the river, brush on plaster, a child reciting numbers. And you know the sentence is not finished.